Chapter 1279. From the moment Qin Guang decided to go out to the moment he piloted the plane alone and took off from the Imperial City Airport, it took less than 15 minutes. The top-notch plane that he had once used had long been eliminated. Now, his personal plane had been upgraded and was the pinnacle of the perfect combination of modern technology and internal martial arts. This plane had the technological feel of a modern fighter plane, but the material used was the ultra-strong and lightweight bone plate of a strange beast that could not be found on Earth. The surface was smeared with the oil of a giant fish and a strange beast that was extracted from nature. Apart from that, its power system also combined the effects of fuel and a martial artist's internal strength. Its flying speed was not something that an ordinary plane on Earth could compare to. With Qin Guang's skills, he could inject his internal strength without stopping and reach any place in the true martial realm. From the time the plane took off to the time he arrived at the foot of the highest peak, it only took about 10 to 20 minutes. After arriving here, he could not continue piloting the plane. The air was filled with turbulence at any time, and the extremely terrifying yin and yang qi turbulence would also cause a heavy burden on the mechanical parts. In short, Qin Guang used the limits of his mechanical endurance to perform a fancy vertical landing and landed safely. Just like the last time, after blasting a hole in the ground with his palm, he conveniently buried the plane. Qin Guang leaped and disappeared into the forest. The terrifying earthquake just now had caused severe damage to the surrounding environment. There were giant trees lying on the ground everywhere, and there were even a few fresh cracks that emitted the smell of soil on the ground from time to time. Broken tree roots stretched out randomly in the cracks, and there were a few insects crawling up and down from the tree roots from time to time, looking confused and empty. However, Qin Guang did not fly through the air but chose to fly on the ground. The closer he got to the terminating Thought Valley, the more he had an indescribable strong feeling. The air seemed to be filled with a power that was completely different from yin and yang qi. It could even prevent his mental power from extending forward. Under normal circumstances, with his skills in the realm of the true martial realm, he only needed to stand far away from the terminating Thought Valley and he would be able to see everything inside with just a thought. But now, no matter how hard he tried to circulate his mental cultivation technique and crazily extended his mental energy, which was enough to suppress tens of millions of people in a city, he could only see a blur in his mind's eye. About half an hour later, with Qin Guang's speed, he had traversed at least 100 miles and finally stood in front of the entrance of the terminating Thought Valley. Looking up, there were two tall mountains on both sides that pierced through the clouds. It was hard to tell how high they were. The entrance was about a few kilometers wide. There should have been dense trees growing on both sides, but at this time, they had all fallen crookedly to the ground. Not only that, Qin Guang also saw many broken tree trunks. The cuts were very smooth, but the upper halves had mysteriously disappeared. Qin Guang looked around and saw that the broken tree trunks were distributed in a regular pattern. They were basically in the shape of a ray, extending from the inside all the way to the outside. Walking in front of a tree stump, Qin Guang lowered his head to size it up. Then he reached out to touch the fracture. There was still a faint heat on it, but the strange thing was that there were no signs of burning on the fracture. There was only one explanation for this. At the same time that the pillar of light soared into the sky, an extremely powerful heat wave spread out from within in the form of a ray, sweeping through the area and cutting off all the trees. It even evaporated the upper half of the broken tree out of thin air. He then looked at the direction of the tree stump's fracture. Although it looked crooked, it was only because the earthquake had changed the terrain. In fact, the original direction of the fracture should be completely the same, and all the sections should be completely parallel. In that case, the time when the heat wave rushed out should have been before the earthquake. There must be something extraordinary in the terminating Thought Valley. Perhaps Wenwen had discovered it, which was why such an unforeseen event had occurred. Qin Guang cried out in his heart. Could it be that Wenwen was already dead? Thinking of this, he immediately sped up his pace. Everyone else was protected by him and lived a peaceful life. If Wenwen, who was the most talented, was the first to die in this game, it would be embarrassing if word got out, and he would not be able to explain himself. When he found her in the real world, she became different from him because her character in the game had been reset. That would be a great disservice to Wenwen's identity and status as the second strongest player in the pugilistic world. Suddenly, Qin Guang stopped in his tracks. Traces of a battle appeared in front of him. There were fallen tree trunks everywhere, but there was no pattern to the position where they had fallen. From time to time, a few huge footprints would appear on the ground, and the shape of the footprints looked like 4 sharp claws. There was also a long ravine that covered the ground. The ravine was about 3 to 4 meters wide, as if it had been plowed by something. According to what Martial Emperor Changfeng had said, This was probably where the exploration team had fought alongside Wunwun. There were two completely different kinds of marks on the ground. One of them looked like a ferocious tiger, but it was as tall as an elephant. The other was caused by a huge snake-like monster that had slithered across the ground. Now that he saw it, if it was true, the scene back then must have been very tragic. Apart from this, Martial Emperor Changfeng had said that they had only managed to repel these two mutated beasts and had not killed them. This showed how powerful these two mutated beasts were. Chen Guang could not help but feel that Wunwun had encountered two such troublesome mutated beasts not far from the entrance of the End of Thought Valley. If she had been thinking normally, she would have stopped on the spot and returned. According to the geological report, the End of Thought Valley was thousands of kilometers deep. The deeper one went, the colder and wetter it became. There were weeds everywhere and mutated beasts were everywhere. The powerful mutated beasts were even stronger than regular martial emperors. Even martial emperors like the Holy City's three emperors might not be able to take them down. Not only that, but there were no other special products in the End of Thought Valley. Apart from these mutated beasts, there were only some swamps. There were no natural treasures that were beneficial for martial arts. Hence, in the past countless years, only a few bored martial emperors would venture deep into the End of Thought Valley. Most of them would return empty-handed. Many of them even lost their lives in there, so there were even fewer people who went. It was only with the advancement of technology in recent years that Martial Emperor Changfeng led a team of explorers to venture deep for the purpose of mining. In the end, they ended up with nothing. Wunwun's actions were very strange. Could she have discovered something? It was impossible for her to do such a meaningless thing. She must have discovered something which drove her to venture deeper. In that case, what was it that attracted her to enter the depths of the End of Thought Valley despite the danger? With this thought in mind, Qin Guang continued to move forward at a brisk pace. Just like what was recorded in the records, the deeper one went into the End of Thought Valley, the denser the trees became. The soil on the ground became softer as well. A faint burnt smell started to spread in the air. Occasionally, 2 or 3 mutated beasts would appear in the forest after smelling Qin Guang's scent. There were big and small mutated beasts. There were strange apes that stood on 2 feet, ghost wolves with white fur on their ears and blue flames on their paws, and giant bears that were dozens of feet tall. However, all the mutated beasts were intelligent. At first, they came after smelling a human, but when they got closer to Qin Guang, they were frightened by the dangerous aura that surged out of his body and fled in a panic. Normally, Qin Guang would be interested in catching a few mutated beasts to study them. However, now was not the time to do so. Suddenly, he stopped in his tracks and turned his head to look below him. There was a rag on the ground. Qin Guang bent down and picked up the rag. It was cold to the touch. This was a piece of green cloth made of a very special material. It was extremely tough and transparent. It was a high-quality piece of cloth that was specially used to make clothes for martial artists. 1 meter of it cost several million holy coins. If he remembered correctly, Martial Emperor Changfeng had once said that Wunwun wore green clothes. In that case, this cloth had most likely fallen from Wunwun's body. Judging from its shape, it should be part of her sleeves. She had experienced a fierce battle here and it was extremely bitter. Even her sleeves had been torn off. From there, sparse footprints gradually appeared on the ground, leading all the way inside. Observing the shape of these footprints, it seemed that there was more than one person and they were very messy. Although the strong earthquake had changed the terrain significantly, and many parts of the ground had been overturned, Qin Guang could always find one or several deep or shallow footprints every few hundred meters. These footprints were scattered randomly on the soft ground of the terminating Thought Valley. These footprints looked very new and seemed to have been made not long ago, no more than a week ago at most. It happened to coincide with the time when Martial Emperor Changfeng and his group met Wunwun. Wunwun had at least the strength of a martial emperor, and the opponent who could fight with her must be stronger than a martial emperor. If they were traveling normally, it would be impossible to leave these footprints. In that case, there was only one possibility. Both parties were fighting while heading inside, but it was unknown who was chasing who. Qin Guang speculated that Wunwun was being chased by someone. Who was it? Who set up an ambush in this place? What was their motive? What did Wunwun find? The doubts in Qin Guang's heart grew. Unknowingly, he had been running inside for a whole day and night. He had reached the deepest part of the terminating Thought Valley. Apart from the martial emperor who drew the map of the terminating Thought Valley, no one else could reach this place. However, Qin Guang suddenly saw the wreckage of a building on the side of the road. He frowned even more after he got closer to take a closer look. Judging from the materials and architectural style of these collapsed buildings, they were clearly built in the past few decades. Judging from the scale of the buildings, the wreckage covered an area of more than an acre, and at least a few dozen people could have lived in them. However, although the buildings here were completely damaged, there were no corpses. The doubts in Qin Guang's heart grew. If it wasn't the evil ghost faction, he really couldn't think of anyone who would have the need to live in this dark, damp, cold, and infested place with strange beasts. Nowadays, the whole true martial domain could be said to be prosperous and peaceful. The people lived and worked in peace and contentment. There were fewer killings in Jianghu than before. After the expansion of the Ninth Holy City, it could accommodate hundreds of millions of people. In addition to the elderly, the adjacent city outside could also accommodate tens of millions of martial artists. Although the concentration of yin and yang qi in the Holy City was not as good as here, it was better in that it was neutral and peaceful. It would be more beneficial if one practiced internal strength. Qin Guang couldn't think of any reason. Why would one live in this place where even birds wouldn't poop? Why would they build these broken houses? Qin Guang walked 2 more rounds in the wreckage and suddenly made a surprising discovery. There were no traces of electric wires in these buildings. The more he checked, the more puzzled he became. Although only 50 years had passed, the use of electric current had already been popularized in the true martial domain. It had replaced the past backward facilities in many aspects. Nowadays, there were hundreds of billions of people in the true martial domain. Almost everyone knew about the convenience of using electricity. These houses had been built in the last few decades. Moreover, the materials used were relatively new. Even the floors were made of self-leveling cement, which had become popular in the last 10 years. So, it was even more necessary to build houses in this cold and gloomy place with electricity. It must be known that it was very convenient to generate electricity in the true martial domain. It could be arranged for a person who practiced internal strength to squat there and pedal a sports bike to generate the power of a generator. However, there were no electric wires here. There weren't any electrical facilities either. Could it be that the people who lived here didn't need electricity to produce light and heat? Could they create a comfortable environment in this place? Although most of these houses had collapsed, many of the wreckage looked very beautiful. In particular, there were some exquisitely crafted Roman reliefs on them. These reliefs indicated that the original owner of this place was very particular. Suddenly, an idea flashed in Qin Guang's mind. He finally thought of the answer. The people who lived here in the last few decades were not used to using electricity. However, they were very particular about it. So, there was only one option left: the divine race. Picking up a lamp-like thing from the ground, a look of understanding appeared on Qin Guang's face. This lamp holder was completely different from ordinary oil lamps. There was no wick inside. The bottom was not hollow, so it couldn't be filled with oil. However, this thing looked like a wall lamp hanging on the wall. So, the energy source of this thing must be the divine power of the divine race. It was really like wearing out iron shoes in fruitless search, but finding it by chance without even looking for it. Chapter 1280. He continued to rummage around for a few more minutes. He found a lot of daily necessities which further confirmed his guess. The residents here were definitely not normal humans. Their living habits were completely different from the warriors in the real force domain. It was even more impossible for them to be modern people who had come here through the game. In the end, he found 2 or 3 pearls on the ground. There was a small amount of divine power stored in them, which confirmed Qin Guang's guess. It was very likely that these beads were bestowed upon the lesser gods by the higher gods to help them recover their divine power. The divine power inside was too shabby. Qin Guang didn't care about it at all. He threw it on the ground and continued to go deeper without looking back. He didn't plan to go back and call for help. Even if all the Protoss were gathered here, Qin Guang didn't think they could stop him in the real force domain. The buildings that had been completely destroyed in the earthquake should have been the Protoss outpost. The Protoss living here shouldn't be too high-leveled. They shouldn't be much different from the small fries he had encountered in the massacre world, except for Yu Ting and Wes Eni. Everything was just as he had guessed. The deeper he went, the more damaged buildings he saw. The Protoss had not been hiding here for a long time. It was likely that all the Protoss players who had joined the game had gathered here. Their evacuation seemed to be very hasty. Many things that Qin Guang thought were very useful to the Protoss were not taken away. Qin Guang speculated that the Protoss evacuation must have something to do with the Pillar of Light and the earthquake. Previously he was too far away. Although the Pillar of Light was extremely thick, he couldn't see it clearly. But now that Qin Guang thought about it carefully, he felt that there seemed to be 1 or 2 black shadows flashing in the Pillar of Light. At that time he didn't care about these details. But now that he thought about it carefully, Qin Guang had a vague feeling that something was wrong. Maybe those black shadows were the Protoss that had rushed into the sky. This situation was very bad. In other words, a mysterious force had stolen the ancient well without their knowledge, and now it had opened a back door for the Protoss, allowing them to leave this place through an unorthodox method. Qin Guang recalled all kinds of strange things that he had seen in the past 50 years. Could it be that the power that was secretly controlling the progress of the game of jumping off the building was planning to trap me in the true martial world forever? Thinking of this, Qin Guang almost broke out in a cold sweat. The more he thought about it, the more he felt that it was possible. Up until now, he had only opened two large-scale cup worlds, the Transient Sea and the True Martial Domain. Although he was very used to living in the instantaneous sea, it was after all an endless ocean as far as the eye could see. It was 70 to 80% similar to the famous post-apocalyptic movie Future Water World, just that the scale was many times larger. His good friends and the ordinary humans who were implicated might find it interesting at first, but after a long time, they would definitely feel uncomfortable and miss the land world. But the true martial domain was different. Not only was it vast, but it was also filled with beautiful scenery of famous mountains and rivers. In addition, the lakes in the true martial domain were extremely large, and the area of the larger lakes was even larger than the sum of the four oceans on the earth. First, they would subtly influence all the human players to adapt to this place. Using the ancient saying, they would enter a state of indulgence. Then, after they had completed the transformation of the entire world in 50 years, the next step would be to look for the famous mountains, travel all over the Wuxia and see the world. Considering the size of the true martial domain, and the size and mobility of humans, it would be impossible to thoroughly see the true martial domain without tens of millions of years. Even Qin Guang had a faint feeling that the peak of the true martial domain used to be the edge of the true martial domain. He himself used to stand on the peak, but when he looked at the peak from time to time, he would occasionally see a shadow behind the peak. At that time, Qin Guang didn't think much of it, but now that he thought about it, he felt that maybe some kind of power was secretly expanding the true martial domain. The level of science and technology that was constantly advancing suddenly stagnated. More and more strange beasts that had opened their spiritual wisdom took all kinds of abnormalities into consideration. Qin Guang also confirmed his conjecture in his heart. The mastermind behind the scenes seemed to be changing the setting of the true martial domain bit by bit, and also changing the style of the human players who entered from the outside world. When everyone slowly transitioned from the style of science and technology to the style of fantasy set by the Chinese martial arts, the human players as outsiders would be thoroughly integrated into the true martial domain. Everyone who was familiar with him was immersed in this world, and Qin Guang himself was afraid that he wouldn't be able to stay out of it, and could only go with the flow. The more he thought about it, the more uncertain Qin Guang became. But it seems like you have left behind a large group of very important people. My father and mother haven't even been pulled over, and they want me to become an orphan here? Qin Guang thought, if my father and mother, 7 aunts, 8 aunts, grandfather and grandmother were all pulled in, he was afraid that he would really be immersed in it without knowing it. In this regard, he could only say that he was very lucky. Then what did Wenwen discover? As he continued to go inside, Qin Guang saw traces of fighting one after another, but it seemed that the fighting was not intense, and both sides stopped after a brief encounter. It seems like those big and small footprints are running in front, but the small footprints belonging to Wenwen are lagging behind? Qin Guang stopped, lowered his head and muttered to himself. It seemed like the two sides were fighting, and the offensive and defensive reversed, and it became Wenwen chasing and the other side running away. What's going on? Wenwen is fighting and training at the same time. Has she become stronger? No, the probability of this happening is too low. Then there was only one explanation: the other side was anxious and in a hurry to retreat, but they could not kill Wenwen, so they were too lazy to fight back and simply ran inside. Wenwen must have discovered something, so she chased after them. Qin Guang could not help but feel a little angry. He felt that Wenwen was too rash. If she had really discovered something, why would she need to personally take the risk? As long as she passed the news to him, he would be able to kill his way in with lightning speed. There was no risk in this, and he could control the situation in advance before the other side took action. However, things had already reached this point, and Qin Guang did not have the intention to blame anyone. Perhaps Wenwen only found a little bit of information, and was not completely sure, so she decided to probe the situation first. Unknowingly, another half a day passed, and Qin Guang once again ran nearly 1,000 kilometers inside. This end of Thought Valley was in the shape of an inverted gourd, and the deeper he went, the bigger it became. Along the way, more and more strange beasts appeared, each stronger than the last. From the level of ordinary martial emperors, they gradually reached the level of the guiding 13 squadrons. At first, when these strange beasts saw how powerful Qin Guang was, they disappeared in a flash, turning around and running away. But later, when strange beasts with strength close to the holy city's 3 emperors appeared, these previously timid strange beasts suddenly seemed to have been injected with chicken blood, and they desperately rushed towards Qin Guang. Qin Guang raised his hand. He was too lazy to waste time talking nonsense. He killed one with a finger and continued to go in. Don't look at how these strange beasts were exceptionally terrifying in front of others. In front of Qin Guang, they were completely useless. They could not even slow down his speed. As a result, Qin Guang flew on the ground. His 10 fingers were like a machine gun, shooting in all directions. Every time he pointed, there would be a corpse. This continued for a long time. Although Qin Guang could not be exhausted, he could not stand it, and he felt even more strange. Since strange beasts had spiritual intelligence, now that he had released his aura, they should have fled at the sight of him. At this time their behavior was so abnormal. There must be something strange. There was only one explanation. There was someone behind the strange beast. After Qin Guang turned his hand and slapped a strong strange beast whose strength was close to Senior Nun Xn Yuan and Wu Qingming, he searched its soul, and sure enough, he found that an obsession was planted in its mind. This obsession was not targeted at him, but it wanted them to think of ways to stop all humans who tried to enter the depths of the end of Thought Valley, even at the cost of their lives. After flipping over a large stone, Qin Guang suddenly stopped moving forward, and a magnificent city appeared in front of him. This was originally a basin plain that was washed out by the river, covering an area of more than 1,000,000 acres, but at this time, it had been completely transformed into a huge city. The city did not have city walls, and the periphery was surrounded by 2 transformed rivers. The styles of the houses and buildings were very different. There were Chinese-style Suzhou gardens, European-style Gothic buildings, and even Indian-style totem buildings. Even with Qin Guang's vast knowledge, he could not identify the strange style. Without a doubt, this was the base of the Protoss hidden in the true martial realm. They actually built such a magnificent city under his nose. According to the number of houses and the size of the city, it could at least accommodate 2 million people. Unlike the outposts outside the end of Thought Valley, the damage to the city was not high, and the terrifying earthquake only left cracks on some houses. According to the geological officer of the 9th Holy City, this was at least a magnitude 9 earthquake. Qin Guang personally speculated that it might even be above level 10, and the energy released would not only cause this little damage. After a moment he finally understood. The Protoss had actually laid a divine inscription formation on the ground of the entire city, which was automatically triggered when the earthquake occurred, and mitigated the impact of the earthquake. Qin Guang bent down, touched the ground, and felt a slightly familiar fluctuation of divine power. This was the aura of Vasani, whom he had met once before. Suddenly, Qin Guang's heart moved, and he turned around and rushed into the city, only stopping when he was about 20 kilometers away from the city. In front of him was a very flat wasteland, which seemed to have been hastily covered with soil. Qin Guang's palm hit the ground, and more than 100 acres of land was turned over. 9 deep pits appeared on the ground, and Qin Guang clenched his teeth tightly. The ancient well was really here, and this group of bastards had taken it with them when they left. Could it be that the Protoss planned to take the ancient well to the endless divine realm through their back door? If they really succeeded, then even if he saw through all the schemes, it would be useless and he would be dead. Chapter 1281. Although he was a little panicked, he had already reached his limit. He couldn't go any faster. Qin Guang couldn't help but feel regretful. If the aura here wasn't so mysterious and unpredictable, he could have flown the plane here. His speed would have been much faster, and he would have reached his destination by now. However, there was no point in being anxious. He had already arrived here at this juncture. Perhaps he could catch the last train of the divine race. At least it was better than losing without knowing anything. His current speed should be equivalent to more than 180 kilometers per hour on Earth. 2 days passed unknowingly. He finally arrived at the deepest part of the terminating Thought Valley, which was marked on the map. A light screen made entirely of energy appeared in front of him. The light screen emitted a dense glow. It rose from the ground and went straight to the sky. He tried to touch the light screen. As soon as he touched it, he felt an astonishing power attacking him from the light screen. This power was stronger than he had imagined. It wasn't something that could appear in the true martial realm. From this power, Qin Guang could feel at least 3 characteristics. There was the yin and yang energy of the true martial realm. There was also the divine power of the divine race. However, the core was a third power that he had never felt before. He could roughly feel that this power was similar to the power of the Holy Grail. However, it was of a higher level. This third kind of power seemed to have the all-encompassing ability. It had perfectly combined the yin and yang energy and the divine power. It had formed an effect of 1 + 1 = 1. Even the strongest expert of the true martial world, a martial sage who had almost completely fused with the entire world, could suppress him. What was this third power? Was its level above the power of the Holy Grail? He couldn't help but be astonished. Up until now, whether it was Lazuli's divine power, Yu Ting's divine power, or even the power of the natural order that existed at all times in the universe on Earth, their level could not be compared to the power of the Holy Grail. The reason was simple. Although the Holy Grail was a divine weapon from the endless realm of the gods, and appeared to be an unassuming cup, it could create entire planes and worlds out of thin air. Although the levels of this world were high and low, there was the extremely simple and crude mosaic version of the first layer of heaven. However, there was also the huge structure of the 8th layer of heaven, the realm of true martial arts and the Sea of Time. In fact, there was even the world of destiny that Qin Guang had a deep memory of after he had caught a glimpse of it. Although the world of destiny was also flat, it was unknown how big it was. It might even be trillions of times bigger than the true martial realm. Its worldview and structure were no different from the universe where Earth was located. However, even such a massive and majestic plane could still be controlled by the power of the Holy Grail. So, what exactly was this third power that had appeared in front of him? Qin Guang furrowed his brows tightly. He tried again but realized that it was still useless. With the power that he currently controlled, there was only one way to break this light curtain. That was to use all the power in his body and completely mobilize all the power that he could mobilize in the true martial realm. Then he would use the strength of absolute suppression to offset the difference in quality and forcefully break the light curtain. However, if he did that, he was afraid that he would be exhausted in a short period of time. He did not know what kind of situation he would encounter inside, and this would put him in danger. Qin Guang raised his head and looked up. He first tried to fly up into the sky to see if he could find a way to circumvent it. However, when he really flew up, he immediately dispelled this idea. The light curtain extended from the ground of the Valley of Despair to the mountains on both sides of the Valley of Despair. Then, it continued to extend along the mountains on both sides, and it covered the entire depths of the Valley of Despair like a piece of plastic wrap. Qin Guang did not need to try to break through the mountains to make a hole. The other party was not stupid and would not leave such an obvious hole. Even if he broke through the mountains, he would most likely hit the same light curtain in the hole. For the same reason, it was the same to dig a hole in the ground. It seemed that he had no other choice. Landing back on the ground, Qin Guang took a deep breath, and his expression instantly became exceptionally solemn. He took another 10 steps back and slowly adjusted his breathing. The terrifying inner energy flowed through his body like a raging river. The inner strength that was rushing through every meridian in his body could be described as a tangible river. In reality, there were 3 major realms of muscle, bone, and skin as the dividing line. If the inner strength of a muscle strength martial artist was a small stream, the inner strength of a bone strength martial artist was a tributary of the Yangtze River, and the skin strength martial artist was the main stream of the Yangtze River. As for the internal energy in Qin Guang's body, it could no longer be described as the rivers on Earth. Every meridian was surging with the deep ocean currents of the Pacific Ocean. When all of them were added together, it was equivalent to the movement of half of the Pacific Ocean's water. As he continued to operate his power, the airflow around him was pulled by his qi. First, a small whirlwind was born under his feet. After a while, these small whirlwinds gradually merged together and turned into a tornado that lingered around him. This tornado, with Qin Guang as the center, roared and expanded at a speed visible to the naked eye. After a while, the whirlwind turned into a giant tornado with a diameter of more than 500 meters. This was only the part close to the ground. The higher it went, the larger the diameter became. In the sky far higher than the Earth, the diameter of the tornado even expanded to thousands of kilometers. The yin and yang qi in the Zhen Wuxia followed the traction of this tornado. It crazily swarmed from all directions and converged into the tornado. However, the direction was completely opposite to the airflow. From top to bottom, it condensed into the body of Qin Guang at the bottom. The strong airflow took away the soil around Qin Guang, and even the ground around him gradually sunk. After half an hour, he actually created a mountain. The shape of this mountain was very strange. Its diameter was only 100 meters. The top of the mountain seemed to have been flattened by a knife. The shape of the whole mountain was like an upside-down ice cream cone. The mountain wall below was also flattened. If it went forward, it would hit the light curtain. It couldn't go any further. The light curtain that was hidden under the ground was gradually revealed. At this time, the ground had been sucked away by at least 500 meters by the tornado created by Qin Guang. However, the bottom still couldn't be seen. Only God knew how deep it was under the light curtain. Qin Guang didn't even make a move. He just accumulated his strength to create such power. With the continuous infusion of the yin and yang qi of the Zhen Wuxia, Qin Guang's body shape and appearance gradually changed. He looked more and more like himself on Earth. It seemed that because of the gradual deepening of his integration with the Zhen Wuxia, the transformation of the game system was gradually suppressed by his own strength. After a while, Qin Guang finally completely restored his appearance and body shape in the outside world. When the energy in his body surged to the point that he couldn't control it, he finally shouted and punched forward. This punch came out of nowhere. The explosive strength was first compressed to the extreme. Then it turned into a snow-white strength and bombarded forward. This strength did not look very big. However, it had condensed all the yin and yang qi within a radius of thousands of kilometers in the Zhen Wuxia. It had already been compressed to the extreme. The strength brazenly bombarded the light curtain. A loud sound spread and the light curtain shook violently. Ripples began to appear on its surface. They spread in a circle around the place that was bombarded. The light curtain lasted for less than 10 seconds. Finally, a hole that could fit one person was broken. Qin Guang's toes bounced off the ground and he fiercely rushed forward. He rushed through the hole the moment it reformed. When he passed through the light curtain, he was shocked by the scene in front of him. A moment ago he was still in the cold and damp depths of the terminating Thought Valley. However, it was only a thin wall. It was as if he had arrived in another world. Here, birds were singing, flowers were fragrant, and the sun was shining brightly. As far as the eye could see, it was a beautiful scene. The air was filled with a complicated and difficult to understand aura. This wasn't a real aura but some kind of power that contained rules. This power was like the power of the Holy Grail. It was also like the third power that formed the light curtain. At the same time, it felt like the yin and yang qi of the Zhen Wuxia. At the same time, it was mixed with the divine power of the gods. Qin Guang raised his hand slightly. Lightning flashed on his fingertips. The divine power of the gods was also mixed. God knew how many divine powers of the gods were left in it. Among them, the most obvious ones were much more tyrannical than ordinary divine powers. As for the lightning on his fingertips, it belonged to his old acquaintance Yu Ting. Looking up, the light pillar that he saw in the 9th holy city still stood in the sky not far away. There was a black shadow slowly floating in the light pillar. It seemed that the light pillar that he saw before did not disappear. Instead, it was transferred to this light curtain by that mysterious power. Perhaps it was transferred to another space. This fairyland-like place should be the transfer station from the Zhen Wuxia to the endless god realm. Then the gods here should be much stronger than in the game. This could be seen from the fact that Yu Ting's remaining divine power could still condense lightning on his fingertips. Qin Guang took a deep breath. No matter what, he could not accept the fate of being trapped in the Zhen Wuxia forever with everyone. So, no matter the outcome, since he was caught, there would be a place for him to stand. With that in mind, he flew forward. In less than 5 minutes, he stopped abruptly. This was probably the last trace of Wenwen's battle that he had seen so far. The ground was full of holes from the fierce battle. Wenwen seemed to have unleashed the peak strength of a martial emperor. Judging from the marks on the ground, Qin Guang could even conclude that Wenwen's strength was infinitely close to his before he broke through to the martial sage realm. But in the end, she was not the master of the heavenly Holy Grail. No matter how talented she was, she lacked the most important thing compared to him. Looking at the back of the dead but still holding the long sword in one hand, Qin Guang suddenly felt as if many things had been taken out of his heart. In the end, he was still one step too late. She died in battle. Chapter 1282. If Wenwen had died in the real world, Qin Guang did not know how hysterical he would be. But now, even though he knew that this was just a game, even though he knew that Wenwen would still be safe and sound in the real world, and that all her memories of this game would be stripped away, Qin Guang still felt an indescribable coldness in his heart as he looked at her back. He did not even need to get close to see her face. Even though they had not seen each other for a long time, the image of her in green clothes and holding the black saber in her hand was unforgettable. It was not hard to imagine what kind of fierce battle she had experienced before she died. Perhaps before coming here, she did not think that it would be so dangerous. With her strength of a martial emperor who was close to the martial saint realm, even if she could not kill the Protoss, she should be more than enough to protect herself. But once she passed through the light curtain and entered this mysterious place, the power of the Protoss would suddenly increase. With Wenwen's cultivation, it would be very dangerous. Qin Guang went to the front of Wenwen and looked at her face, which was still glaring angrily. Unexpectedly, there were not many wounds on her body, and her clothes were not very damaged. But with Qin Guang's perception, he did not need to reach out to check her breathing to know that she had been dead for a while. There was not the slightest trace of vitality in her body, only a decisive aura of death. Her protective chi was directly broken by a tyrannical divine power, and she died instantly. An inexplicable breeze blew, and Wenwen, who was standing in front of Qin Guang, began to slowly turn into countless fine dust under this breeze and drifted away. Qin Guang raised his hand trying to grab something, but he could only feel the breeze and the fine dust that Wenwen's body had turned into gently passing through his fingertips. At this moment he felt complicated and incomprehensible. He was a little sad, a little resentful and unwilling, but more than that he was grateful. In his mind he had already sorted out the ins and outs of the entire matter. The situation that the mysterious force manipulated in the dark was originally foolproof. It had forcibly created such a city for the divine race in the true martial domain, which was under the control of the entire world. At the same time, perhaps it was because of the innate ability of humans to adapt to the outside world, or perhaps it was because everyone's mind was secretly manipulated. However, the human players had gradually become addicted to the true martial domain during these 50 years, and they were unable to extricate themselves. The identity of the immortal elder, the temptation of immortality, was enough to make many people crazy with excitement. Even though they were worried about their families in the outside world, the players who entered this world were like the people around Qin Guang, unconsciously ignored many things that should not be abandoned. Qin Guang might be the only one sober, but it was useless. He couldn't even change the minds of Tang Ying, Zhuo Jingxi, Chu Zijin and Lu Fei, not to mention the others. The mysterious power seemed to be manipulating everything in the deepest subconscious of the players' hearts. It was manipulated by external objects, words and even hypnosis. Otherwise, even if Qin Guang used a mental cultivation technique, he wouldn't be able to resist it. But in the end there was someone else who was awake. It was none other than Wenwen, whom he had not seen for a long time. He had planned to look for her through her classmates in the real world after the world in the cup was over. Qin Guang even felt that she might have discovered something long before the jump barrier was triggered, when Wenwen started to disappear. Only after entering this world within cup would she do this with such a clear goal. He resolutely refused to meet me, and used 50 years to crazily increase his cultivation to the peak of the martial emperor realm in the true martial world. Then he appeared here at the most critical moment. Qin Guang speculated that if it wasn't for Wenwen's timely appearance, perhaps he wouldn't have been able to see the strange pillar of light that shot up into the sky, and the earthquake wouldn't have spread outside, so he wouldn't have been able to find this place. He was sure that the Protoss didn't expect someone to suddenly break in at this time. They had waited for 50 years, prepared for 50 years and had always been very stable. They were planning to quietly leave and slightly relax their vigilance, but they didn't expect someone to break in at the last moment, and coincidentally step on the last node of the space teleportation. The result of this situation was that the smuggling operation, which should have been completed quietly, was leaked. The pillar of light that shot up into the sky was indeed the escape channel of the Protoss. The process should have been completed secretly in this mysterious place, but it was detected by Qin Guang, who was in the outside world. He watched as Wenwen passed away, and tried to figure out what had happened in his mind. Perhaps there were some differences in the details, but the context of the matter should be similar. Qin Guang took a deep breath. He still remembered that when he was weak, in school or in the internet cafes outside the school, she was always there to protect him. Now that he had become the #1 martial artist in the world, the master of the transcending heaven Holy Grail, and the invincible martial saint in this true martial domain, he was so eager to get her to come to his side. Although the two of them had already broken through that layer of window paper, Qin Guang's heart was not really because of those dirty thoughts, but purely because he felt that she was safe and at ease by his side. In the end, he never expected that she already had her own ideas, and even made a decision from the very beginning. She must not be like the others who were muddle-headed, but knew from the beginning that this was a trap, and then used 50 years of experience to send the most important signal to him at the most critical moment. Qin Guang's gaze slowly moved forward, and after passing through the light curtain, the aura that originally suppressed his mental strength slowly faded, and in his mind's eye, a huge divine inscription matrix gradually appeared. From his side, it extended all the way to the still bright pillar of light in the distance. Looking from afar, this divine inscription matrix was a standard circle, and the boundary of the circle was right under Qin Guang's feet, extending at a slight angle all the way to the distance. From this arc, the position of the center of the circle was clearly that pillar of light that soared into the sky. Looking down again, the place where Wunwun was previously standing was slowly forming a matrix within a matrix. This should be one of the matrix's eyes. Presumably, she had stepped on this matrix's eye, and temporarily broke the stability of the divine inscription matrix, which caused the opponent's plan to go down the drain. No longer hesitating, Qin Guang broke into a run, and directly rushed towards that pillar of light. As the saying goes, see the mountain, see the horse run to death. This was probably his current situation. Looking from afar, that pillar of light was very clear, as if it was very close, but when he really intended to run in that direction, he discovered that it was at least 100 miles away. Fortunately, Qin Guang recovered quickly. Although that punch just now had consumed most of his strength, it seemed that after entering this mysterious space, his strength had also recovered at a speed far faster than usual with the help of the strange energy formed by the four strange energies mixed together. As he ran, he was puzzled in his heart. Logically speaking, this rule energy should be greatly beneficial to the God clan, but why was it that he also felt as if he was bathing in a hot spring, and his whole body felt very comfortable? Furthermore, he had a faint feeling that it was impossible for him to continue breaking through to the Martial Saint realm, and was faintly loosening. Could it be that my cultivation could still increase? He was simply indescribably shocked. No one knew better than him that the Martial Saint realm was already the strongest strength that the entire True Force domain could accommodate, and had already completely reached the upper limit, touching the ceiling. The moment he became a Martial Saint, his entire person had already become a part of the True Force domain. Of course, it could also be said that the True Force domain had become a part of him. Now, it was still getting stronger, and he himself did not know what kind of state it would be after the Martial Saint realm. However, at this moment he did not have time to figure out what was so strange about this matter. He only rushed forward like a cannonball, bringing up a strong gust of wind behind him, and looked like a sprinting sports car. Boom! There was a loud noise, and Qin Guang's feet left two long marks on the ground. He had finally reached his destination. However, the scene that appeared in front of him was not what he had imagined. He had thought that the God clan was retreating, and the scene should be quite chaotic. However, at this moment, there were 999 God clan members standing here in a strict formation, and they had an orderly bearing. There were exactly 999 people, no more, no less. Among them, Divine Emperor Yu Ting and Divine Emperor Eight Directions, the two experts that Qin Guang had met once before, stood in the front of the formation, but there were 6 other people standing side by side with them. Qin Guang remembered that Lioli had once mentioned that she was one of the 10 strongest Divine Emperors in the Endless God realm, and that Yu Ting's strength was vaguely above hers, and definitely not weaker than hers. Now, it seemed that since the other 6 Divine Emperors could stand side by side with Yu Ting, it meant that their strength was not inferior to Yu Ting's. 8 of the 10 Divine Emperors had come, and all of them were standing here. What a surprise. I originally thought that as Divine Emperors you should leave first. After all, in my world it has always been popular to let the leader leave first. As Qin Guang spoke, he looked up at the light pillar behind the God clan, and there were still humanoid figures flying up one after another. Yu Ting took a step forward. "We have no intention of leaving," Qin Guang interrupted him. "I know what you want to say. This is a trap, right?" "It wasn't a trap, but something happened at the last minute, so you will probably die here." Yu Ting smiled as if he was talking about a trivial matter. Qin Guang pretended to be surprised. "Don't you know that you can't kill me in the game dimension?" The 8 Divine Emperors next to Yu Ting said impatiently, "What's with all the nonsense? We have our own methods, there's no need for you to worry about it." "Where's the ancient well? Where is it?" Qin Guang didn't mind being offended by the 8 Divine Emperors and pretended to be calm. "It's already been destroyed by us, so just give up." The 8 Divine Emperors impatiently waved their hands. Qin Guang, however, could tell from their expressions that they were bluffing. "Destroyed? You can't do that, can you?" If the ancient well could be destroyed so easily, why would they waste so much effort to take it away? That thing was a mission item for the realm within a cup, protected by the core laws of the Holy Grail, so it couldn't be destroyed. Even the noble gods are full of lies. It seems that the so-called gods are nothing more than this. Since you were planning to ambush me and I was planning to kill you, then let's do it now. Since they couldn't come to an agreement, Qin Guang's expression suddenly changed, and he made the first move. The one who strikes first gains the upper hand, and the one who strikes last suffers. Right now he was fearless. Chapter 1283. When he first obtained the heavenly Holy Grail, he never thought that he would one day have to fight against 999 Protoss in this cup. After all, in his mind, the so-called Protoss should be a lofty and incomparably majestic existence. Although the Yu Ting Divine Emperor and the others standing in front of him were still powerful, they were far inferior to the kind of power that Qin Guang felt from Lu Li. Although they were called divine emperors, they felt no different from mortals. Qin Guang understood the reason. It was probably because this was the heavenly Holy Grail's world in the cup. What they appeared here was not their real bodies but just their projections. The formation of these projections should have to abide by some rules of the world. Just like the natives of the true martial domain, their projections could not display the divine power and ability of their real bodies. Moreover, they were contaminated with many characteristics that belonged to humans, which could also be called weaknesses. That was emotional, which could also be understood as joy, anger, sorrow, and joy. According to Qin Guang's original understanding, he thought that he would one day clear the heavenly Holy Grail step by step. Then he would fight his way into the endless divine realm and fight against the other Protoss. But now, this situation suddenly appeared in front of him. He had no choice but to face it head-on. According to Yu Ting's words, Qin Guang deduced that they were not ready either. Since that was the case, everyone was actually on the same starting line. If they were to fight, then let's fight. In the blink of an eye, he had already rushed in front of nearly 1,000 Protoss. He raised his arm and waved his palm. As the wind from his palm rose, a crimson palm shadow that covered 100 miles appeared out of thin air. It covered the sky and covered the earth, covering the place where the Protoss stood. After the crimson palm shadow appeared, it instantly turned from nothingness to reality. In less than a breath's time, it turned into a giant magma palm that covered 100 miles of sky. That's right, it was magma. It looked like stone, but it was burning with burning blue flames. It was covered with cracks, but it was exceptionally sturdy. How did it feel to have a giant magma palm that covered 100 miles of land pressing down on top of one's head? How strong was the pressure? In fact, any of the gods present here could unleash a power that was billions of times stronger than this in the endless god realm. Rationally, they looked down on Qin Guang's so-called all-out palm strike. But now, deep in their hearts, they were trembling uncontrollably. This palm strike was so powerful that even Qin Guang himself was caught off guard. Although he had made the first move, intending to use his full strength in one strike, according to his own impression, the fiery rock palm that he was currently using was clearly known for its condensed strength. How could it possibly cover 100 miles in one strike? Wasn't this nonsense? When did I become so excited? Forget it, it's not important. It's always a good thing that I've become stronger. Following this momentum, Qin Guang pressed his hand down. The giant rock palm in the air was completely synchronized with his movements, coming down from above. The 999 gods standing on the ground took a deep breath. They immediately used all sorts of methods and joined forces to counterattack. Qin Guang cursed, "You people call yourselves gods. How dare you bully a mere mortal like me with numbers?" The 8 god emperors said indifferently, "When killing a traitor, only the result matters, not the process. If one person kills you, you'll be killed. If 10 people kill you, you'll still be killed. If all of you attack together, you'll still be killed. Your shamelessness is similar to this old man's style in the past, but it doesn't mean anything." Before Qin Guang even finished speaking, the giant palm had already arrived above the gods' heads. In an instant, the ground below was filled with all sorts of colors. Yu Ting transformed into a bolt of lightning and condensed the lightning around him. A lightning spear appeared in his hand and pierced towards Qin Guang's palm with a dazzling bolt of lightning. The eyes of the 8 god emperors shone with divine light. 2 rays of golden light shot out from his eyes and condensed into a jade-like square seal above his head. The bottom of the square seal stood on the ground, enveloping the 8 god emperors. Then it grew into the sky. In the blink of an eye, the top of the square seal was pressed against the magma palm. The others also had their own methods. Some turned into flames, some turned into ice sculptures, and some bent over and slammed their palms on the ground to create a mound of earth. There were even non-human god emperors who simply revealed their true forms, transforming into various elemental creatures or legendary divine beasts. The so-called true gods actually didn't have any fixed style for their moves, nor did they have a clear name for their moves. Generally speaking, they were the most basic ways to control their own power. The god race's cultivation methods and rules were not as orderly and clear as the human race's inherited cultivation methods. Most of them followed the power and rules they controlled to search for more original power. For example, Yu Ting had cultivated the power of lightning from the beginning. When he was still a low-level mortal god, he might have mastered some thunder technique or thunder summoning art. But when he became a god emperor, he no longer needed to be bound by any techniques or routines. Instead, he wandered freely in the rules of the power of lightning. In the endless divine realm, every power had its own corresponding rules. As a god, if he wanted to obtain more power, he had to constantly perfect the rules he controlled. Of course, everyone had their own ways of perfecting their own rules. Yu Ting's method was to collect billions of types of lightning in the divine realm and fuse the different characteristics of each type into his own. If one day he could gather all the strange thunders in the endless divinity world and even the lower planes, and master all of them, he might be able to control the laws, surpass the realm of God Emperor, and become the next master god. At this moment, the gods present were displaying the different nomological powers that they each controlled. Previously in the True Force domain or other game spaces, because the rules in the Heavenly Holy Grail were completely different from the endless divine realm, and the power of the Holy Grail suppressed them, they couldn't even exert a billionth of their power. Now, in this transitional zone between the True Force domain and the endless divine realm, the gods who stayed here could finally relax a little and exert a billionth of their power. Although it was still a far cry from their original bodies, it was already 100 times stronger than before. Not only that, as the gods exerted their power in unison, their power resonated inexplicably and fused into one, turning into a picture scroll that looked like a divine realm. There were mountains, water, and even flowers, birds, insects, and fish in this picture scroll. At first, the divine realm displayed by this picture scroll was very small, as if there was only a mountain and a valley. But perhaps after only a millionth of a second, the picture scroll's area grew countless times. The picture scroll was still the same size, but the scenery inside had become thousands of mountains and rivers, and there were even cities dotting it. There were no roads between the cities, but only 2 or 3 airships flew in the sky from time to time. Rather than saying they were airships, they were more like magic treasures. Another millionth of a second passed, and the picture scroll finally collided with Chen Guang's giant lava palm. There was no sound, and the scene that should have been like Mars colliding with Earth was frighteningly quiet. The giant lava palm melted at a speed visible to the naked eye, like snow being exposed to the scorching sun. But after melting, the lava that should have flowed down inexplicably disappeared, only turning into little sparks of fire that slid down, and then suddenly disappeared into thin air. As for the picture scroll that was formed by the power of the gods, there were countless crimson raindrops falling from the sky, completely losing heat in midair, turning into volcanic ash like dust. Chen Guang stopped and looked at the slowly fading picture scroll, his eyes unprecedentedly solemn. What appeared in front of him was a huge black palm print that covered 100 miles, still emitting bursts of black smoke, but in the middle of the palm print, there were 2 places that were safe and sound. One of them was the place where the gods stood, and the other was a straight line cut out by the light beam. When his giant lava palm came into contact with the light pillar in the air, it also silently and completely dissipated. He thought that he could borrow the power of the realm of true force here, and use the power of the realm to suppress the opponent. Even if the opponent was 999 gods, he was not afraid, but he did not expect that all 999 gods were god emperors, and he did not expect that when 999 god emperors joined hands, they could produce a resonance and evolve the picture scroll of the realm of gods. Chen Guang had the power of the realm of gods, and the opponent in front of him also had the power of the realm of gods, and the opponent evolved the endless realm of gods, which was several levels higher than the realm of true force. He was suppressed in the realm, and he did not have the upper hand in terms of the total amount of strength. Although Chen Guang was floating in the air at this time, he was not in a good situation at all. I really believe you. When he heard Lu Li mention the name of the top 10 god emperors of the realm of gods, Chen Guang thought that there were at most dozens of god emperors in the endless realm of gods. Who would have thought that there were only 8 of the top 10 here, and the other 999 were all the same? If it was a one-on-one fight, he was not afraid of anyone. Otherwise, even if they really had 999 god emperors, he could exhaust them one by one. But he really could not stand these people. This was only the first move, and you guys are like the 6 gods in the anime, always giving me the body fusion technique of 999 people. It is fine if you guys come at me together, but you guys still give me this. Are you worthy of your identity? Forget it, why should I care about a group of projections here? I am afraid that their real bodies have no shame, and these are just mere projections, let alone think about it. In the blink of an eye, Chen Guang attacked again. Since the fire rock palm did not work, Chen Guang simply changed the method, and tried the ice destruction technique of the 400,000 unique techniques. An instant later he chopped down from above with a whirlwind kick. Countless ice crystals appeared out of thin air and shot toward the ground like bullets. This technique was one of the 400,000 unique techniques of Qin Guang, but in the real world his cultivation was too low to use it. Only in this true martial domain, with the help of the yin and yang qi, he could mobilize the power of heaven and earth to achieve this effect. This ice destruction technique looked like the ice storm in fantasy novels, but the speed of Qin Guang from preparing to the actual move was much faster. This was the biggest difference between martial arts and magic. Nearly 1,000 god race people also responded to the moves, not panicking in the face of changes. In the face of Qin Guang's different methods, the gods also came up with different ways to deal with it. This time, about half of the god race people who believed that their defense was strong enough chose to resist in place, while the other half used various methods to flash in all directions. Strangely, as the gods used their divine powers in unison, their powers resonated once again. After the colorful power of the god emperors who stayed in place was mobilized, they inexplicably gathered together on their own, turning into a chaotic halo that covered their heads. This chaotic halo circled and rotated, looking like a nebula. The ice crystals that Qin Guang shot out fell on the nebula, and the terrifying momentum suddenly disintegrated, turning into sparkles of light that merged into this nebula. As for the other half of the god emperors who were dispersing, most of them were on the periphery of the formation. When they flew up, there was also a stream of light that swept across the top of each god emperor's head, evolving into a ring above their heads. Qin Guang saw it clearly. Yes, it was a ring. It looked like Saturn's ring, very weak, but it sucked in his ice crystals. His seemingly powerful ice destruction had only added a little color to the ring, added a few more colors to the nebula of the other half of the god emperor, and conveniently extinguished the smoke that was rising from the black palm print that he had left behind. This was very embarrassing. Qin Guang froze in place for a long time. He took the initiative to attack, but the 2 consecutive moves did nothing. Ever since he came to the realm of true force, he had never encountered such a situation. At this time he was not the only one who was shocked. The god emperors were also very surprised. It was not that they had never encountered a situation similar to the divine power resonance in the endless divine realm, but it was relatively rare. So when it appeared for the first time they were very calm. The god emperors were also smart people. When 999 smart people were together, they could think of things and do things together without eye contact. They intended to leave an illusion to Qin Guang, so that Qin Guang would think that their joint attack was deliberate. After all, although the 8 god emperors said it very easily as if they could kill Qin Guang with a raise of their hand, but when the fire rock palm was used, the god emperors knew that in this realm of true force, especially in this transitional place, Qin Guang's strength was also very strong. After all, they were not here in person but only projections. They did not have inexhaustible divine power, nor did they have the energy to destroy the world. On the other side, after 2 consecutive moves failed, Qin Guang also felt that things were difficult to deal with, so he did not take the initiative to attack again. He planned to delay. It had been about half an hour since he passed through the light curtain and entered here. Although the feeling was very subtle, the strength of his body was indeed slowly increasing. The feeling of becoming stronger was hidden very deeply, and it was even difficult to notice, but it really existed. Qin Guang clearly felt that there was a strange power drilling into his body from the countless pores all over his body. He couldn't even block it. This so-called strange power was the mixture of divine power, the power of the Holy Grail, the yin-yang aura, and a 4th, higher-level power that he had never come into contact with before. This feeling was actually very bad, as if things had become out of his control. But the 999 god emperors in front of him were indeed strong enemies. Instead of forcefully resisting, it was better to let nature take its course and become stronger, so that he could solve the problem in front of him first. Yu Ting and the 8 god emperors also noticed his current predicament, so they decided to change from defense to offense. What kind of scene would it look like when 999 god emperors used their secret techniques to kill someone? It was hard for Qin Guang to describe it, because in the blink of an eye, his whole body was shaken by the golden long sword that suddenly shot from the front. These god emperors are really shameless, aren't they? It's one thing for you to fuse when you block my attack, but why do you have to fuse with everything you do? Damn it, you're clearly either using the fire element, using some mysterious magic of aging, or emitting a green light with green sprouts on top of the green light, or having some strange little people with 3 heads and 6 arms popping out of your belly buttons. But when the strange powers of these god emperors spread out from their bodies, they all mysteriously disappeared, and finally turned into this long sword that could pierce the heavens and pierce the earth, a sword that looked like it could draw a river on the ground. Qin Guang felt that he was not fighting against 999 God Emperors. These God Emperors were basically living in groups, with collective intelligence. Lord God Emperor, your surname is Jiao, and your given name is 999 God Emperors. Chapter 1284. Qin Guang tried to avoid the giant sword, but he changed his mind after a few tries. It seemed to be a combination skill formed by the immortal emperors unconsciously, but there must be someone controlling it secretly. As soon as he moved aside a little, the huge sword slightly adjusted its direction. How was this a divine greatsword? It was clearly an unreasonable automatic cruise missile. He couldn't dodge it, so he had to take it head-on. He couldn't rely on earth martial arts like the Golden Bell Shield and Iron Skin. Even the defensive martial arts he learned from the 400,000 unique skills in the realm of true martial arts were not enough. Was he going to use his trump card so soon? Qin Guang felt helpless. He was only at the beginning. The true martial divine art was his trump card, and he had to reveal it now. He always made decisions quickly, and now he didn't have much time to hesitate. He shook his dantian, and the true martial divine art was fully activated. In an instant, Qin Guang's aura suddenly changed. There wasn't any smile on his face, but it was replaced with a solemn expression. Streams of smoke slowly rose from his body, condensing into a huge shadow behind him. This light shadow slowly took shape. It looked like a human, but in the blink of an eye, it turned into a statue of a god with 6 heads and 12 arms. With Qin Guang as the axis, the statue rose from the ground. At first, it was only about 100 feet tall, but in the blink of an eye, a second statue appeared behind it. The second statue was about 1,000 feet tall, but it wasn't over yet. A third statue appeared behind the second statue. In the short time that the giant sword slashed towards Qin Guang, 9 illusions appeared behind Qin Guang. Each of the 9 phantoms was taller than the last, and they looked even more ferocious and terrifying. The 9th one was a giant green Wuxia dragon whose length could be calculated in the nth power of 10. Even Qin Guang was shocked at first, but he soon calmed down. The statues behind him looked strange, but they were all powerful deities and divine beasts that he had imagined in this life. As a descendant of China and the representative of China, the image of the Chinese divine dragon was deeply rooted in everyone's heart, and Qin Guang wasn't an exception. The gods led by divine Emperor Yu Ting immediately tensed up when they saw this. However, they were also very confident in the golden longsword that they had formed together. For a moment, the emotions of mortals clouded the minds of the deities. They were confident, but also had a bad feeling that they might not be able to defeat their opponent. Gods had always been fearless. When their hearts began to worry, the divinity of the projections they left in this place would unwittingly weaken and be replaced by humanity. The Xinhuang were affected by the characteristics of mortals. Under the nervous gaze of the deities, the golden sword finally slashed at the front of the shadows, where Qin Guang was standing. In an instant, the 9 phantoms behind Qin Guang moved at the same time. First, the first phantasm bent down and clasped its fists at the massive sword. With a poochie sound, the statue's fists were cut open like tofu dregs. The second statue with 6 heads and 12 arms stretched out a total of 12 fists to hit the sword, but it was useless. Finally, the last dragon-shaped divine statue that was standing proudly in the sky lowered its body to the ground. It condensed its body and opened its mouth to bite the giant sword. At the same time, it continuously spat out green origin beads. The energy beads hit the blade of the sword again and again. Coupled with the bite of the dragon-shaped idol, the golden sword finally collapsed in the air. Qin Guang took a deep breath as lightning flickered in his eyes. He wanted to take advantage of his opponent's weakness to take his life. Taking advantage of the fact that he had regained the upper hand, he once again took the initiative to attack. However, this time he didn't make a big move. Instead, he gathered all his strength into his physical body and pounced towards the center of the gods. Since the big attack didn't work, he'd take them down one by one. Close combat was about to break out at any moment. Perhaps it had been a long time since the gods had gotten used to fighting in close combat instead of using divine power. Other than Yu Ting and a few of the strongest 10 great god emperors in the 8 directions, the rest of the gods performed exceptionally poorly. At this moment, Qin Guang's attacks no longer looked as mighty as before. But that was because he had gathered all his power. Although it looked like a simple punch, kick, or even a slash from his palm, the might was stronger than his previous attacks. But after fighting like this for about 10 minutes, he stopped again. He couldn't figure it out. He was at least 30% stronger than when he was in the realm of true force. What he used was a simple but powerful killing technique. What he used was the true force divine technique that he was most proud of. But he couldn't kill a single person. No matter who he hit, at the same time, protective forces would appear on the bodies of 999 God Emperors in the places where they were hit. For example, he once punched Yu Ting's shoulder. But the shoulders of the other 999 Xinhuang all shook at the same time. The counterforce of his fist didn't seem to be from a single Xinhuang. Instead, it was a counterattack from all of them at the same time. He wanted to curse. He had seen shameless people, but he had never seen someone as shameless as this. The deities also understood. Although they didn't know how such a deep resonance was triggered, it wasn't a bad thing after all. Their hearts, which had been slightly raised because of Qin Guang's strength, gradually calmed down. At this time, divine power can be continuously replenished in this place, and Qin Guang doesn't seem to be able to kill anyone. Then we can use this divine power resonance to exhaust him to death. Qin Guang gritted his teeth and thought to himself, I don't believe that your divine power is inexhaustible. I'll exhaust you all to death. He pounced again. This time he planned to fight to the death. After 3 days and 3 nights, Qin Guang stopped. He was a little dispirited. This shameless Xinhuang with the surname Jiao and the given name 999 was a little unreasonable. Give up and wait for death. You're no match for us. Xinhuang Yuting said indifferently. Qin Guang sighed. You people are really breaking my limits again and again. Where do you get the face to be so shameless? He had said similar words countless times in the past 3 days, but it had never had any effect. It was just a way to vent a little dissatisfaction in his heart. He didn't expect that when he said these words, Yuting's face actually turned a little red. He actually felt ashamed. Qin Guang was very surprised and planned to continue to stab him. Originally, he thought that psychological attacks were useless against these shameless Xinhuang. He was about to give up. Now he suddenly saw a miraculous effect. How could he not be happy? At this time, there was a sudden cracking sound in his stomach. The smile on Qin Guang's face suddenly froze. It was replaced by an expression that didn't know whether to be happy or confused. He already felt that the internal strength in his dantian had just completely collapsed, and in an instant, it spread throughout his body. If he didn't guess wrong, he was about to break through. From martial sage to the next realm. What should I be called? Martial god? I named myself? Since martial sage is already the limit of true martial domain, can I still go back like this? Just as Qin Guang was thinking about this, he suddenly discovered that his inner force that had undergone a qualitative change was constantly assimilating every part of his body, including his flesh and blood, as well as the elemental power of his most powerful earth mind breaker. Chapter 1285. In the past, his internal energy and the innate ability of the earth-paced exploder belonged to 2 different systems. The 2 of them vaguely complemented each other, but Qin Guang never imagined that there would be a day when the 2 of them would fuse together. Even if there was such a disaster, Qin Guang felt that it should be the talent of the earth burster that swallowed the internal force, not the other way around. After all, he had heard from Lu Li that although the name of the earth burster was not elegant, its rank was a real god emperor in the heavenly realm. He himself was the one and only soy sauce popper, but Liu Li once joked with him, saying that if he gave birth to a baby in the endless god realm and a soy sauce popper fell to the ground, the baby would definitely be born as a god emperor, just a weaker one. But if it could live to adulthood, it might not reach the realm of the 10 great god emperors, but it would not be too far away. Qin Guang did not take it seriously at that time and protested that he was a man. How could he give birth to a baby? You Lu Li help me? Because of this joke he even gave Lu Li a beating. But in retrospect he felt that Lu Li seemed to be joking, but it did emphasize once again how high the level of the earth burster was. Therefore, Qin Guang had always had great expectations for the talent of the earth burster. But he never expected that the talent of the earth burster would be swallowed by the internal force. This was not scientific. Internal force originated from the martial arts on earth. Since ancient times, the most powerful martial artists were only in the master realm. Not to mention breaking the void, they might not even be able to rush out of the earth. The gap between internal force and elemental talent could not be measured by reason. It was not like a snake swallowing an elephant but an ant swallowing an elephant. But now it had really happened. His situation doesn't look right. The God Emperor's observation was so keen that Yu Ting immediately noticed Qin Guang's abnormality. Another one of the 10 great God Emperors nodded. We don't need to be polite with him. This is our chance. If this drags on, I'm afraid there will be unforeseen events. Logically speaking, it would take at least some time for 999 people to come to a consensus, but the gods themselves did not notice it. In just a few words they came to a consensus and attacked again. At this time, Qin Guang was at the stage where the two powers were fusing. He opened his eyes and watched as the power once again emerged from where the gods stood, and then watched as their power condensed into a mountain. This mountain peak was extremely steep. Although it only appeared to be several hundred feet tall, it gave Qin Guang an extremely strong sense of oppression. This is the residence of the Master God of Chaos. We actually summoned the phantom image of the chaotic peak. One of the divine emperors immediately pointed out the origin of this mountain. The primal chaos peak has been floating in the skies of the god realm for countless years. Who knows how many master gods of primal chaos divine wills have stained its surface? How can we possibly summon it out? I'm afraid it's just another divine mountain that's slightly similar, right? This time, a voice of opposition could be heard from the crowd. Yu Ting said, "That's not right. I've been to the chaotic peak before. In the middle of the mountain, there's an entire area that has been dyed pure white by the divine power of the Master God of Chaos. Look at this mountain." The gods looked up and followed Yu Ting's finger. Indeed, they saw that ring of pure white. It was just a simple white, but this white was not the white it was. As Qin Guang looked at it, he instantly lost consciousness. It was as if countless thoughts had suddenly appeared in his mind. These thoughts belonged to him, but they also did not listen to him. Mysterious lines scattered in his mind along with these thoughts, but then turned into something that was both tangible and intangible. When he imagined himself reaching out to grab it, these lines scattered like smoke. Then for some reason, fragments of memories appeared in Qin Guang's mind. It was very difficult for him to describe what these memories were about. Whenever he tried to think hard, his mind would feel empty. However, if he deliberately ignored them, he would feel that these thoughts and memories were everywhere. It was like an earthling walking on the street. If someone patted him on the shoulder and asked him what 1 + 1 equals, he would immediately answer that it was equal to 2. It was the same logic. If Qin Guang had been to the endless divine realm, he would know that the ring of white on the mountain represented one of the laws controlled by the Master God of Chaos. The muddled memories that appeared in his mind were actually his understanding of these laws. The so-called laws represented the fundamental operating rules of a world. For example, in the universe where Earth resided, some of the most basic laws would always exist. As small as the interaction between atoms and molecules, as large as the gravitational force between planets in a stellar system, or as large as the Milky Way's flat surface instead of a sphere, the Milky Way's body was not a sphere. Why did the speed of light have to be 300,000 kilometers per second? Why did the trajectories of ions on a microscopic scale all appear spherical, but on a galaxy they appear flat? In every universe or plane, the most fundamental hidden laws determined everything in that plane. At this moment, Qin Guang was unbelievably able to see through one of the laws of the divine realm in his human form. Even if it was just an unremarkable piece of the laws controlled by the Master God of Chaos, his realm had already completely surpassed that of an ordinary god-emperor. Just as he was lost in thought, the chaotic peak had already risen into the sky and came crashing down on him. The shadow of the Master God's residence was indeed different. As soon as the chaotic peak moved, countless pitch-black cracks appeared out of nowhere in the place where the mountain was. The power of the chaotic peak's shadow was not something that a mere plane between the true martial realm and the endless divine realm could withstand. A slight movement would cause the structure of the space to become unstable and cracks would appear. By the time Qin Guang regained his senses, the primal chaos peak had already crashed into him. Qin Guang felt as if he was still immortal and his stomach was hit by an F1 car at 300 kilometers per hour. His entire body was flattened. That's right, flattened. He became an unremarkable human figure stuck on the chaotic peak. The thickness of his entire body was not more than 2 millimeters. More than half of his body was sucked into the cracks in the space. Even with his current sturdy body, his body was constantly being torn apart by the cracks in the space. He was even being sucked into the cracks. If Qin Guang's Earth explosion's innate ability was still there, he wouldn't have to panic so much. Even if he only had a strand of hair left, he would still be able to revive with full health. But this innate ability of his was just gone. He was a little flustered. However, as soon as this thought arose in his mind, a light cracking sound came from his body. Qin Guang knew that his new version of inner strength had sensed the danger of life and death and was operating on its own. He didn't know if he could withstand it. His mind was a little worried. He forced his eyes open, but all he saw was a vast expanse of whiteness. Strange, is this a coincidence? The place where he collided with the chaotic peak was actually precisely on the white zone on the mountainside. The distance was even closer. To be precise, it was zero distance. The infusion of laws that had happened once before came back to him once again. This time, when he completely came back to his senses, the chaotic peak had already disappeared. He didn't even know what he had done. He only vaguely remembered that when the new version of inner strength surged in his body, there were many more inexplicable memories and fragments in his mind. Unlike the haze from before, he could even vaguely see a human figure this time. This human figure's face couldn't be seen clearly. He couldn't even tell if it was a man or a woman. He seemed to be slowly approaching from the void. His movements seemed to be struggling. This human figure was clearly standing very straight and his steps were very steady. However, for some reason, Qin Guang felt that he was in great pain. Gradually, the human figure overlapped with the body in Qin Guang's mind. Qin Guang turned around and only saw the back of the human figure slowly dissipating in the intense light. Then he opened his eyes. The gods who were standing not far away from him were completely dumbfounded. Right before their eyes, that fellow who was supposed to be dead had suddenly regained his human form. Then, he raised his hand and caressed the chaos peak in a seemingly gentle manner. That's right, it was just a touch. He didn't even use any force. Then the chaotic peak directly collapsed. He was still floating in the same place and his aura was even stronger. The chaotic peak, which had high hopes placed on it, couldn't even leave any injuries on him, let alone kill him. This guy even arrogantly closed his eyes. When he opened his eyes again, the gods met his gaze for a brief moment. He actually wanted to turn his head away subconsciously. What a joke. Although we are all just projections and only have 1/1000th of the original's power, how could we not even be able to withstand the gaze of a mortal? On the other side, Qin Guang raised his hand again. This time the gods immediately noticed something different. Qin Guang raised his right palm with his palm facing up. A cyclone the size of a bowling ball floated above his palm. At a glance, the cyclone wasn't big and didn't look scary. However, in the eyes of the God Emperor, it was completely abnormal. Although Qin Guang was strong previously, the level of power he used was still considered inferior inner strength in their eyes. It was just that he had an overwhelming advantage in terms of quantity, which was why they had to work together to fight against him. But now the cyclone in his palm contained divine power. Moreover, it was extremely pure. In terms of realm, it wasn't any weaker than the God Emperor. The name Martial God Realm that Qin Guang came up with was not in vain. He now understood. As the saying goes, all roads lead to Rome. Under the rules of the endless divine realm, no matter what kind of power evolved to the extreme, it would be tainted with the characteristics of divine power. He broke through the martial saint realm and became a martial god. His inner strength evolved further and became divine power. He just didn't know how his divine power level was. Compared to the God Emperor, was there a big difference? Forget it, it's useless to think so much. I'll know after I try. Qin Guang took a deep breath. He shook his wrist and threw the cyclone in his right palm like throwing a bowling ball. His move reminded him of an anime he had seen before. It was very similar to the Rasengan in Naruto. But my Rasengan doesn't need to be held in my hand. I can throw it. The gods looked serious. This time no one chose to avoid it. Instead, they condensed the divine realm projection scroll again. Then the spiral force crashed into the scroll like a huge stone thrown into a lake. The thousands of mountains and rivers in the scroll instantly turned into ashes. Even the countless cities and the Protoss living in them were turned into powder. Qin Guang's eyelids twitched. It was like crushing dry weeds and smashing rotten wood. Chapter 1286. He didn't know if the dead gods in the painting were real or not, but this wasn't the time for him to feel sorry for the state of the universe. The right thing to do was to pursue the enemy while they were victorious. Qin Guang watched as the cyclones charged into the formation of the God Emperors. Like bowling pins, they tore dozens of famous God Emperors into pieces in an instant. Then they used up all their energy and slowly dissipated. Although these were only projections and not the real body, the fact that Qin Guang had killed dozens of God Emperors in one move still shocked Yu Ting and the others. Even the 10 God Emperors felt that if they were the ones standing in front of the cyclones when they were at full power, they probably wouldn't be able to stop it either. But when they turned their attention back to Qin Guang, they wanted to curse him out loud. Qin Guang was still floating there, but compared to before, he had both his hands raised in the air. What was even more hateful was that there were at least 10 similar cyclones floating in front of him at the same time. These cyclones kept tumbling between his hands as if he could throw them at any time. Fortunately, the gods had never seen juggling before. Otherwise, they would immediately recognize that Qin Guang was imitating an acrobat who threw balls. But other people could at most throw 5 or 7 cyclones, but Qin Guang was throwing 15 at the same time. Each of these 15 cyclones was equivalent to a bomb. Moreover, Qin Guang had to continuously use his new inner force to maintain their balance. At the same time, he had to add more fire to the cyclones. It was much more difficult to perform. Everyone, don't panic. The best part is yet to come. Seeing the gods looking at him in shock, Qin Guang grinned and said coldly. As the saying went, those who were not of the same race must have a different heart. Although he didn't know why these god emperors hated him so much, Qin Guang didn't plan to negotiate with them. It was time to put an end to them. As soon as he finished speaking, Qin Guang flicked his fingers. 15 killer weapons with the same power as the previous cyclones flew out of his hands and towards the gods. The Yuting gods no longer showed any carelessness on their faces. They finally unleashed all of their trump cards. Yuting's body collapsed with a loud bang. He simply turned into a field of lightning and spread out. It was as if he had covered all the gods. The bodies of the 8 divine emperors collapsed as well. A golden divine seal descended from the sky and enveloped the place where the gods were standing. It was the same for the other 6 divine emperors. Each of them used their own techniques, and in an instant the platform on which the gods stood was shrouded in a hazy halo. The halo looked like a divine seal in all directions, but it was also covered with Yuting's lightning. It also contained the different powers of the other 6 super-strong god emperors. Below the halo, the bodies of the god race exploded one after another, turning into the most fundamental energy, leaving behind only a wisp of consciousness. In the blink of an eye, the figures of over 900 god emperors disappeared at the same time, leaving only a mirage-like circle of light. The gods here were projections. They were bodies formed by the combination of divine power and rules. They could condense into a physical body, but they could also collapse into fundamental energy. Now, in this transitional zone, divine power was abundant. As long as the divine will of the god race still existed, they could restore their bodies at any time. The dozens of god emperors who had died under Qin Guang's cyclones did not have this chance. The divine will preserved in their projected bodies had been completely crushed into the most fundamental energy, and could no longer be restored. This time, the divine world scroll appeared above the heads of the gods again. It was bigger and clearer. The city that could still be seen before looked like a tiny pixel on the new divine world scroll. However, this pixel was not like a real square on a computer. If one's vision was good enough, they could constantly enlarge things in their eyes. They could still see the panicked god race fleeing in all directions in the city. At this time, Qin Guang could see it clearly. The 15 cyclones he had shot out were about to hit the scroll, but his attention was on the god race in the scroll. Qin Guang just watched as his cyclones crashed into the scroll. In an instant, the mountains and water inside were smashed into pieces. Countless god race scurried around like headless flies. This scene was no better than the scene of humans facing the end of the world in the movies. Qin Guang came to a realization. The so-called Protoss were nothing more than intelligent life forms that lived in another world. Perhaps they had a longer lifespan and could fly. Perhaps they had 3 heads and 6 arms and possessed more power. Perhaps even a child could have 1 or several lower planes for him to play with. Perhaps the plane of a child's toy was as big as the Earth's universe, with the same number of living creatures. But in the face of the crisis of extinction, the god race was no different from humans. On second thought, online games were very popular on Earth nowadays. Many young people had more or less played them. They were either role-playing games like MMORPGs, or the Three Kingdoms strategy games, where players managed a few cities or even a country. There were even Star Wars-type simulation games, where a player could even create an interstellar empire and rule over countless planets. Could it be that what we thought was just a simple game was actually a fictional world and life that actually existed in the first place? Otherwise, if the computer games of this era could be made into a prototype, who knew what the games would be like decades or centuries later? If computers produced artificial intelligence and programs had feelings, the NPCs that were originally set in the game would think that they were really alive. Then, in the eyes of the NPCs in the game, would the players on Earth also be god race? Qin Guang had never thought that he would have so many strange thoughts in his mind when he saw the city, which was as small as a speck of dust, being destroyed. It was so small that a normal person could only see the little people fleeing in panic with a high-powered microscope. It was really strange. If the god race really existed, then in their eyes he should be the NPC that was created. If they cut off the computer's power supply, they should stop working. Otherwise, if they pulled out the hard drive and threw it into the pool, the NPC would die a horrible death. But now it was clear that the NPC had rebelled. With a slap, he created a rumbling cyclone. When the cyclone fell into the painting, It became a space-time vortex that could tear everything apart. Then the god race who were supposed to be high and mighty became stray dogs. They were even dragged into the vortex miserably. They were most likely dead. Finally, when the cyclone completely destroyed the painting, Yu Ting and the other god emperors who were standing below were in big trouble. Previously, a single cyclone had killed dozens of god emperors on the spot. Now that a total of 15 cyclones had entered the painting, the circle of light formed by the god emperors became much dimmer in no time. Then the huge circle of light suddenly exploded, turning into hundreds of small light orbs that scattered in all directions. Qin Guang's cyclone chased after the god race. It did not disperse until it destroyed hundreds of small light orbs. Although he did not see the corpses, Qin Guang knew that he had killed hundreds of god emperors with one slap. He suddenly lost his respect for the god emperors. Even if they were just projections, they were all real god emperors. When Yu Ting and the others reformed their bodies, Qin Guang had a complicated expression on his face. He took a deep breath and said, "The god emperors are nothing more than this." Yu Ting's face no longer had the arrogance from before. Instead, he looked uncertain. "Now, I even suspect that you were deliberately sent here to die," Qin Guang said again. If the god emperors were here in person, no matter what Qin Guang said, they would not be shaken. But now, Yu Ting and the others were only projections, and they were tainted with human characteristics. As soon as Qin Guang said this, the youngest and hot-tempered god emperor of 8 directions immediately gave himself away. His brows were tightly furrowed, and his heart was similarly puzzled. The origin of the divinity world had given them such an important mission. It wanted them to kill the rebels who could shake the foundation of the divinity world, the source of all evil. But why did they only let the mighty god emperors send their projections that were only 10 billionths of the strength of their true selves? Even if the rules were slightly loosened so that their projections could reach 1/10,000th or even 1 billionth of the strength of their true selves, they would not be cut into pieces like vegetables. Although Qin Guang said this provocatively, his eyes never relaxed as he looked at the expressions of the god emperors. At this time, Qin Guang felt very uncomfortable. It was said that people had 7 emotions and 6 desires: joy, anger, sorrow, and joy. This was normal, but now standing in front of him were real gods. These gods were now frowning and pondering like humans, bewildered and uncertain. This meant that their hearts were shaken, and they might even have guessed something. At the same time, something else happened to Qin Guang. The hundreds of god emperors who had died did not leave nothing behind. Instead, like the god race who had died in the slaughtering world, they turned into origin energy and floated in the air. However, they were absorbed by Qin Guang, filtered, and then floated out of his body. This was a very subtle change. Yu Ting and the others could not see it, but Qin Guang knew it. It was not the first time. He was very familiar with it. Previously, when he had just entered the True Force realm and killed the 4 god emperors, something similar happened. Qin Guang knew that there must be something extra in his body, but he did not know what it was or what it could be used for. However, this was not the time to think about these things. It was more important to resolve the trouble in front of them first. In any case, you should be on your way now. If I have the chance to go to the divine realm in the future, I don't mind paying you a visit. As he spoke, Qin Guang raised his hand again, but this time he did not use any of the martial arts he had used before. He clenched his hands into fists and raised them high above his head. The new version of internal strength surged from all over his body and gathered in his fists. Then it gradually condensed in the air above his fists. This time it was not a cyclone. Instead, it was like a supernova that had just been bred by the universe. Qin Guang did not know why he came up with this move. It was just a sudden idea in his subconscious. His intuition told him that using this new version of internal strength could achieve the strongest power. He could kill all the god emperors who had been haunting him before. Opposite him, Yu Ting and Ba Fang's expressions changed at the same time when they saw this move. Yu Ting exclaimed, This is... Ba Fang's reaction was more complicated. He seemed to be a little excited and a little afraid. He only murmured, "Impossible. This is impossible." Chapter 1287. The other 10 divine emperors did not react as strongly as these 2. Instead, they were puzzled as to why these 2 had suddenly lost their composure. Although they were about to die, they were only projections here. If they were gone, then so be it. It would indeed affect their true bodies, but not to the extent of hurting them. It would take at least 1,000,000 years to tens of thousands of years. By then, the divine will lost in these projections would slowly recover. What is the meaning of this? A black-robed female divine emperor could not help but ask. On the other side, Qin Guang was still making his move. Although they did not understand the meaning behind Qinguang's move, they could tell that it was no small matter just by looking at his posture. Logically speaking, the 8 divine emperors present should immediately join forces and use themselves as a guide to draw the remaining 300 divine emperors to work together. Otherwise they would die without a doubt. But now Yu Ting and Ba Feng were not in a stable state of mind and could not control the overall situation. Although the remaining 6 deity emperors could still barely fight back, they couldn't even withstand a single move from Qinguang. Now that there were only 300 deity emperors left, and Qinguang was preparing his ultimate move, the 8 peak-level deity emperors would definitely die if they didn't work together. Yu Ting, Ba Feng, hurry up and attack before he does, a tall and burly divine emperor urged. At the same time, the other divine emperors had already begun to mobilize the energy in their bodies. Unexpectedly, Divine Emperor Yu Ting and Divine Emperor 8 Directions didn't move at all when they heard this. The two of them were like 2 startled rabbits. What are you doing? Hurry up. The other Celestial Emperor urged impatiently as well. Divine Emperor Yu Ting remained indifferent. Instead, he slumped to the ground and shook his head violently. His expression was one of extreme despair. At this time, Vesni, who had already returned to the immortal realm, looked at Divine Emperor Yu Ting's true body sitting on the shrine in horror. Her mouth was wide open and she did not understand what was going on. She couldn't remember how many years it had been since she last saw such an expression on Divine Emperor Yu Ting's face. Even hundreds of thousands of years ago, when his true body fought against another powerful being in the God realm, his expression didn't change. But now, Lord Yu Ting, who was at least one of the top 10 divine emperors and even had the potential to be the strongest divine emperor, had a terrified expression on his face. No, it wasn't just fear. There were other emotions hidden behind the fear. However, perhaps it was because Divine Emperor Yu Ting had not laughed for too many years, much less been angry, or perhaps it was because his divine power was too great. The hazy layer of light on the surface of his body blocked his face, preventing him from seeing it clearly. This seemed to be excitement? But wasn't this too strange? On one side he was terrified, but on the other he was excited. He even seemed to be looking forward to it. What had he seen in the game? What had happened? What kind of strange thing could cause the emotions of the projection to cross the barriers of countless planes, and even break through the tens of billions of levels of difference to make Lord Yu Ting's true body show such an expression? She couldn't help but feel nervous. Yu Ting's true body was like an ordinary person who suddenly lost a cell, and then rolled on the ground in pain because of the death of that cell. Although the strength of each divine emperor's projection in the transition space far surpassed that of ordinary martial emperors, compared to their true bodies, they were not even comparable to a single cell. Yu Ting's shrine was like this, and the 8-direction divine palace was not much better. The silent angel who had just arrived at the 8-direction divine palace through the teleportation array, saw this scene. In the transition space, Qinguang was still preparing to attack. Divine Emperor Yu Ting finally spoke again. Forget it, forget it. The 8-direction divine emperor's eyes finally regained clarity. They were also dejected and even waved their hands desolately. Don't struggle. We're dead. The remaining 300 divine emperors immediately understood what these two meant. They had no intention of resisting at all. Instead, they planned to close their eyes and wait for death. Although everyone was at a disadvantage from the beginning to the end, and although they couldn't withstand the opponent's attack, they were just waiting for death. What was this? Wait, it seemed like a thought suddenly came to the minds of the other 6 supreme emperors standing in the front row. This game mission seemed to be strange from the beginning. Before this, they had more or less experienced the test of the mission several times, but every time, it was their real bodies that were left in the divine realm, and their projections were sent here with a whoosh. But this time, during the teleportation, these divine emperors received a different order. It wasn't a direct order in their ears, but a thought was left in their minds. This thought told them to hold on no matter what until the pillar of light behind them faded completely. Although they didn't know what the divine realm's origin meant, they didn't dare to be careless. But now, it seemed that Yu Ting in 8-direction didn't receive the thought of the divine realm's origin at all. Otherwise, they wouldn't have suddenly given up struggling so dispiritedly. It should be known that the death of their projections here would not affect their foundation. But the true body that remained in the divine realm had to survive under the influence of the Origin's will. Every move of the divine race was under the observation and control of the Origin's will. Although the divine realm's origin could not directly obliterate anyone, if it cut off the connection between their true body and the rules, or if it made it a little more difficult for them to comprehend the rules, then they would have to give up the idea of coming into contact with the real rules and becoming a Lord God. Although the divine realm's origin could easily live for hundreds of thousands of years, if they couldn't become a Lord God and become a part of the rules, they would die one day. Unlike the fragile life forms in the planes under their control, the death of the God race was a true annihilation, a complete disappearance. There was no chance of reincarnation or rebirth. Even if they took over someone else's body or relied on some cultivation method to achieve nirvana, they would still die completely after experiencing nirvana countless times. Compared to those inferior souls trapped in the cages they had created, the divine race was not even sure who was happier. But when they thought about it again, although those inferior souls seemed to have eternal life, in the final analysis, it was because their single lifespan was too short. Their false eternity was just an instant in the divine race's eyes. Everyone present was a divine emperor at the top of the pyramid of the endless divine realm. There were even divine emperors who had nothing better to do, who had just raised their hands to create a plane, only to completely collapse it with a flip of their hands. And this was not the first time. In the instant they turned their hands over, who knew how many civilizations had gone through the ups and downs of the planes they had created, and how many souls had gone through the cycle of reincarnation and rebirth. Therefore, the more powerful a divine emperor was, the more they understood that the origin's will could not be defied. The reason why the divine emperors held such high positions of power and could summon the wind and rain in the divine realm was not just because of their personal strength or the influence they had. The most fundamental reason was that they were the closest to becoming a Lord God, the closest to becoming an eternal God. Perhaps one day, a divine emperor could become a Lord God in one fell swoop and become a part of the rules. Cutting off the channel of advancement was equivalent to letting them die. There was essentially no difference between waiting for their demise and dying on the spot. But now Yu Ting and Ba Feng had clearly been abandoned by the Origin's will before the mission had even begun. What could it be? The other divine emperors turned to look at Qin Guang in front of them. At this moment, the light condensed on his fists was becoming more and more intense, so much so that even their eyes were hurting. Although no one knew how many years had passed, although some things had become legends among legends, and even those who had lived from that era until now were only a few of the most powerful and long-lived divine emperors, or even the Lord Gods, those stories were still deeply rooted in the hearts of the endless divine realm. Yu Ting was the most powerful divine emperor who had lived from that era until now. Although many people were not convinced, in a sense, Yu Ting was indeed the strongest person in the endless divine realm below the Lord Gods. As for Ba Feng, although he was still young, everyone knew that this rising star was a loyal fan of that legend. Even his shrine was imitating others by referring to ancient texts. In that case, the identity of this archenemy in the game was about to be revealed. The divine emperors all turned to look at Qin Guang, their eyes filled with shock and despair. It's time. Just then, a voice came from the divine emperor's formation. The divine emperors turned back again, only to see that the pillar of light that shot into the sky was rapidly dimming. The black shadow that represented the low-tier divine emperor was long gone. The low-tier divine emperor had all left this place. That meant that the mission of the divine emperor's projections was completely over. Thinking of this, the divine emperors no longer panicked. Instead, they looked relieved as Qin Guang finally unleashed his ultimate move. That's right, relieved. Qin Guang raised his fists horizontally. He did not use any extra moves, only intense golden light shot out from his fists. There was no special power, just sunlight shining on the divine emperors. Then, be it Yu Ting or Ba Feng who were shocked, or the other divine emperors, they were all shrouded by the light and quickly turned to dust. When Qin Guang stopped and the light dimmed, he looked up into the distance. The pillar of light had completely disappeared. The divine emperors had all disappeared. The 9 ancient wells that he had been searching for all this time were neatly on the ground not far away. However, the strange thing was that the ancient wells were not lined up side by side. Instead, they were arranged in a ring. Qin Guang's brows were tightly knitted as he turned his head to look at the barrier that sealed everything. He recalled the primal chaos peak that he had previously caught a glimpse of. For some reason, he felt that this matter wasn't over yet. At this moment, 9 wisps of black smoke came out of the 9 ancient wells. The incomparably pure energy contained within the black smoke caused his entire body to tremble violently. It was not that he was timid, but that the purity of the energy was simply too high, and the will contained within it was simply too strong. It was so strong that even a simple glance at it made him feel as if his will was rapidly collapsing uncontrollably. As expected. Chapter 1288. Previously, the gods thought that they could hide their plan to stall for time from Qin Guang. However, since both sides were facing each other and their strength was so strong, Qin Guang would be able to detect even the slightest change in the breathing rate of any god emperor, let alone the slightest movement. How could they hide it from him? If they had come in person with the realm and willpower of a god emperor, Qin Guang would not be able to see through them no matter how powerful he was. However, since they were only projections and because they were contaminated with the characteristics of humans, it would not be difficult for Qin Guang to see through their thoughts. Previously, Qin Guang was only concerned about the ancient well. Although the light beam was still sending away the low-level gods, it was only a minor detail. As long as the well was still there, the core and foundation of the realm in the cup would not be destroyed, and he would be able to leave safely with the human players. Qin Guang had slaughtered 999 deity emperors with a wave of his hand because both sides were enemies, and it was also something that Qin Guang had done in passing. Their delay was meaningless. However, now that the light beam had completely dissipated, this matter should have come to an end. However, when he saw the ancient well that was hidden by the gods reappear, he finally figured out why the gods were stalling for time. The coercion in the black smoke gave him a familiar yet strange feeling. It was familiar because he had felt a similar feeling from Colored Li's original body. It was strange because although the coercion seemed to be brewing and seemed weak, the momentum it contained was far stronger than Colored Li's. This meant that the power contained in the black smoke was far stronger than Colored Li's. However, Colored Li was already one of the strongest god emperors. It was much stronger than Colored Li, but its aura was similar to hers. Combined with the chaos peak that he had heard from the god emperors, the identity of the person represented by the 9 black smoke was obvious. It was Colored Li's father, the master god of chaos. Although Qin Guang had heard of this master god for a long time, he never thought that he would meet him face to face one day, and that he would come so suddenly and so quickly. Even if he really met the master god of chaos, Qin Guang felt that he should wait until he completed the test of the 3,000 worlds and became the real master of the heavenly Holy Grail. After that, he would become a god and kill his way into the endless heavenly realm as a king. Then he would conquer billions of heavenly kingdoms with Colored Li and use the name of the master god of chaos to swindle people. In Qin Guang's eyes, the master god of chaos was Colored Li's father after all. However, after interacting with the many deity emperors, Qin Guang still had a deep feeling that these deities might not care much about kinship, even if they were just projections. It would be impossible for him to use the guise of a chaos master god to swindle others. However, Qin Guang originally thought that he wouldn't have to go against them. However, looking at the situation now, the master god of chaos did not come with good intentions. Qin Guang tried to blast the black smoke away with 2 moves. However, even though he had used all his strength, the force he exerted couldn't even get close to the ancient well. Instead, it hit an invisible wall that could not be seen by the naked eye. Then it was like a clay ox entering the sea, unable to make any waves. It seemed that he could not stop the arrival of the master god of chaos. Qin Guang estimated the strength of the invisible wall in his mind. If he exerted all his strength and used a variant of the move just now, he might be able to break the invisible wall. However, who knew if there was another layer behind the invisible wall? If it was a blessing, it would not be a curse. If it was a curse, it could not be avoided. The arrival of the master god of chaos was definitely not to chat with him. It was very likely that he was ordered to kill the traitor, like those master god of chaos. Speaking of which, Qin Guang also found it funny. He was a good young man of the new era who grew up under the red flag. At worst he picked up a holy grail, or at worst he became the owner of the cup. How did he become the traitor, in the words of these master god of chaos? I have never entered the heavenly realm, and I have never become one of your people. So who did I betray? Who did I betray? These chaotic thoughts did not last long in Qin Guang's mind. The 9 ancient wells changed again. The black smoke coming out from the mouth of the wells became thicker and thicker. Gradually, it even covered the light completely. At a glance, there was only a black mass. Qin Guang measured the volume of the black smoke in his mind. As he expected, there were at least 3 more layers behind the first invisible wall. Even if he went all out and broke the first layer, he could only stare at the other layers. Forget it. Let's see what the master god of chaos is capable of. Qin Guang focused his eyes and stared at the black smoke. However, he was secretly circulating his internal energy. His internal energy did not stop growing. Instead, it continued to grow. In addition, after killing the last 300 master god emperors, especially the 8 master god emperors led by Yu Ting, most of their source energy was assimilated by the transitional space. However, there was always some core energy that was absorbed into Qin Guang's body. Not only that, after the transitional space assimilated the energy left by the many Master God Emperors, the special energy mixed with the 4 types of energy was further strengthened. The speed at which the energy was forcibly poured into Qin Guang's body became faster. Whether Qin Guang was willing or not, he was now in a situation where his breath was also becoming stronger. The black smoke cloud became darker and denser. Although it still looked like a fog, Qin Guang, who was hundreds of meters away from it, could already feel a suction force. It was written in the physics textbook that gravity was everywhere. Even if 2 ping-pong balls were placed on a table, there would still be a gravitational force between them. It was just that the gravitational force was so small that it could be completely ignored. But now, Qin Guang was hundreds of meters away from the black cloud. The volume of the cloud was only a few thousand cubic meters. If he could easily feel the suction force, it could only mean that the density of the cloud itself had reached a very terrifying level. It would not be an exaggeration to say that it was evolving into a black hole. What really affected Qin Guang was the pressure of the black cloud. At first he could easily resist it. But as the power in the cloud became more and more solid, cold sweat gradually appeared on his forehead. He could not take it anymore, but there was nothing he could do. Qin Guang did not dare to float in the air anymore. Instead, he slowly landed on the ground. Previously, he had been using the azure real body that he had seen to measure the power of a god emperor. He had even imagined how powerful the Master God of Chaos was. But now the Master God of Chaos did not show up at all. The overwhelming pressure seemed to freeze the time and space around him. Qin Guang finally realized that his previous imagination was so stupid and ridiculous. Even though the Master God of Chaos was only 1 level higher than the God Emperor, the difference between them was like heaven and earth. They were not on the same level at all. The difference between the Master God who incarnated the rule and the God Emperor who controlled the rule was simply the difference of dimensions. Master God of Chaos, what are you doing? Qin Guang, who was half buried in the ground, could not help but murmur to himself. At this moment, the black cloud suddenly dispersed and turned into a giant palm. It easily tore the invisible wall apart, and then crossed the void at lightning speed, grabbing Qin Guang hard. Qin Guang's eyes widened. There was no fear on his face, only helplessness. He thought that he could at least fight it. He did not expect that he would be defeated so quickly. He watched the black cloud turn into a giant palm. In his mind he knew that he should avoid it. But when he really wanted to move, he found that he could not move at all. What was sealed was not only his body but also all the power in this transitional space. Of course, that included the new internal force in his body. He finally understood many things that he had not understood before. He was ambushed. Chapter 1289. From the beginning of the slaughtering world, the invincible Chu Feng had already fallen into a trap. This trap was not very profound. It was just an overt plot to trap him. Even if Chu Feng felt strange, he could not escape. In the slaughtering world, whether it was for himself or to protect Chu Zijin and Lu Fei, who were involved at that time, Qin Guang had to follow the requirements of the slaughtering world. In the end, Chu Feng transformed into a blood pigeon and went on a killing spree. Qin Guang had no choice. He could not control himself at all. After the slaughtering world died, the origin energy released by the divine emperors was absorbed by Chu Feng. Then Chu Feng let out a colorful fart. He could not resist it at all. After entering the jumping-off building world, many divine race members had died here one after another. However, most of them were small fries and couldn't enter Qin Guang's eyes. They didn't leave much origin energy behind. After entering the true martial domain, Qin Guang began to slaughter the divine emperors with his own hands. This was because the 4 divine emperors of the 4 deities temple were ignorant and took the initiative to provoke him. Later on, even after Qin Guang entered the 9th sacred city, he didn't take the initiative to attack the celestial race. When he started to search for the celestial race on a large scale, the celestial race had already hidden in the depths of the End of Thought Valley. Moreover, they had conveniently hidden the 9 ancient wells. After that, Qin Guang chased after the celestial race and faced 999 celestial emperors. Everyone's position was originally hostile. The other side seemed to want to take the ancient wells away. He and all the human players were trapped here. Of course, Qin Guang had no qualms about killing the Protoss. The Protoss would not close their eyes and wait to be killed. Naturally, a fight between the two sides was inevitable. As long as they fought, the result would be a fight to the death. Qin Guang did not care much about the lives of the Protoss. Once the Protoss died, their bodies and thoughts would naturally be reduced to origin energy. Then they would be absorbed by Qinguang invisibly. In addition, since he entered this transition space, he had been passively absorbing the mixed power in the air. These processes were irreversible and irresistible. Previously, Qinguang felt that this was a good thing. After all, he would not truly die in the world in the cup. If he became stronger, it would be easier for him to deal with the God Emperor. However, the moment he was squeezed by the giant palm formed by the Master God of Chaos, Qinguang clearly felt that he was very close to death. It was not the kind of death that could be resurrected, but the complete destruction of his soul. It was even more complete than death in reality. This was a trap through and through. Whether it was the absorption of the Divine Emperor's origin energy before or the absorption of this mixed energy after entering the transition space, there was only one fundamental purpose: to change the structure of his origin energy, to give his body divinity, to separate himself from the identity of the Master of the Holy Grail, and to take a step closer to the characteristics of the God race. Perhaps the mastermind's goal was to let Qinguang indulge in the feeling of becoming stronger while lying down. Then he would suddenly realize that it was a trap. While killing him, he would feel regret in his heart. Qinguang did not indulge in it. In fact, he had always been awake and alert, but it was of no use. The Master God of Chaos had only sent a hand across space and time, and it was already so powerful that Qinguang could not resist it at all. The pressure on his body was getting stronger and stronger. Qinguang did not struggle anymore. It was not that he had given up easily. Instead, although he had been caught like a fool from the beginning to the end, as if he did not resist at all, in fact, he had exerted all his strength, but it was to no avail. As the pressure of the giant palm continued to increase, from time to time, there was a creaking sound coming from Qinguang's body. It was an indescribable pain. When the pain exceeded the extreme, he felt nothing at all. Qinguang knew that this was probably because he was really going to die. However, the greatest pain did not come from his body, but from the depths of his soul. Liuli once said that Qinguang was insensitive and had no respect for her, a God Emperor, and did not know fear at all. Qinguang only thought that she was praising him for being brave and fearless. That was the truth. Although Qinguang had always been an ordinary person, in his memory, he had never been afraid of anything since he was a child. To put it bluntly, he was bold, boundlessly bold. There were very few people like this, or maybe there were none at all. It was probably because of the ancestors' protection that he could live to the age of 20. If it were someone else, he would have died a long time ago. However, it was different this time. For the first time he felt fear. It was a trembling that came from the depths of his soul, and it even made him feel despair. Vaguely, there was a crisp sound of glass shattering. Suddenly, the first crack appeared on the surface of Qinguang's body, which was far more solid than diamonds. He was using all his internal strength to resist the pressure. The crystallization of his body was because it was too hard. However, in the face of the giant palm of the Master God of Chaos, he was still helpless. As the first crack appeared, more and more cracks appeared on his body, like the spring grass after the rain. In an instant they covered his entire body. The cracking sound became more and more intense. Accompanied by a loud bang, the invincible and omnipotent Qinguang in the true force domain finally broke into countless pieces, and then turned into smoke and dust that dissipated in the air. At the last moment before he lost consciousness, perhaps the giant black palm had completed its task, Qinguang finally saw the 9 ancient wells through the giant palm. The 9 ancient wells also dissipated with the wind, along with his body. Not only did the Master God of Chaos crush him to death with one palm, but he also killed 2 birds with one stone when he condensed this giant palm. He used up the power of the heavenly Holy Grail contained in the 9 ancient wells. Suddenly, a thought appeared in Qinguang's mind. It was related to the dissipating light beam and the many low-level gods that were sent away. It turned out that he was mistaken, or that all of the gods had been deceived. That light beam was not a passage back to the endless divine realm. It was clearly a sacrificial ceremony, and the purpose of sacrificing more than 3 million gods was to provide the Master God of Chaos with the power of this palm. The 9 ancient wells were not a path to the next layer of the floating island. From the beginning, they were the core of the sacrificial ceremony. When the 9 ancient wells were combined, it was basically a divine weapon of the endless divine realm, called the 9 Immortals' Peak. This 9 Immortals' Peak was the residence of the Master God of Chaos in the endless divine realm. Each of the 9 floating mountains surrounding the Chaos Peak contained the lifetime essence of more than 100 God Emperors. God Emperors had a long lifespan, but the Master God of Chaos had an even longer lifespan. Over the countless years of the divine realm, countless powerful deity emperors had become the followers of the Master God of Chaos. However, they did not manage to become a master god and died on one of the 9 immortals' peaks on the path of searching for the laws. Most of their strength had been used up, but there would always be some remnants left on the 9 immortals' peak. Trillions of years had passed, and the 9 gods' peak had transformed from 9 ordinary floating islands into a famous divine artifact in the endless god realm. Legend had it that it had even withstood a blow from the god of space and time without shattering. Qin Guang could only express his speechlessness. Only God knew how the master god of chaos smuggled the 9 immortals' peak to the true martial realm in advance, and then disguised it as a task tool. Also, who was the one behind this? It's fine if I die because of you, but you still want to reveal the answer at the last moment? Are you planning to piss me off first? Are you still going to whip the corpse? Qin Guang could not be bothered to complain anymore. Forget it, if others are trapped here then so be it. Now that I'm about to die, why should I care so much? This time I've fallen too hard. Leaving such a thought in his mind, Qin Guang's vision turned black, and all his consciousness completely collapsed. Time passed and no one knew how much time had passed. In the void of the true martial realm, faint murmurs could be heard. Maybe I'm dead? No, if I'm really dead then why do I think I'm dead? Then shouldn't I know nothing, or should I be crossing the bridge of helplessness in the underworld? Or else I should have a soul or something, right? Wait a minute, what happened just now? Forget it, I can't remember, I'll continue to sleep. Time flies. Qin Guang was clearly dead, but he always felt that he was still alive. He did not know how much time had passed, nor did he know what he was doing at this time and what state he was in. While he was sleeping, another person fell into unprecedented busyness. At this moment, Lu Li had transformed into an ordinary martial artist and was lurking in the true martial realm. She walked and stopped in this world and no one knew what she was doing. She looked like an ordinary martial artist. Perhaps 10 million years had passed, or perhaps 100 million years had passed. Lu Li's figure flashed in the 9th sacred city, and then she finally disappeared from the true martial realm. In the depths of the Sea of Time on the Sage Island, Lu Li's figure was also left under the statue of Sage Right Qin. She was dressed in linen clothes and looked travel-worn. However, she did not stay for long. She was like a passerby and only lingered under the statue's feet for a while and then disappeared. In the world of fate, in the world of Qilin's arm which was covered with brass fireworks, in the world of Mosaic Racetrack, many places that Qin Guang had been to, and some places that he had never been to were still in the chaos. In the unformed small world, Lu Li's figure was left behind. After walking through all of them, Lu Li disappeared from the heavenly Holy Grail, and appeared in the real world. In the past she could not appear in the real world. However, after the real world and the real world had merged, the real world had also become a part of the heavenly Holy Grail. As long as she was willing to consume her divine power, she could also descend. The outside was still bustling with traffic and the lights were waning. It was as if nothing had changed. Lu Li stood in the campus of Gokyo University, and looked at a group of men and women who were talking and laughing in the distance. They were a group of elite students of Gokyo University. They were still the same people but they were not the same people. At this moment in this world, perhaps only Lu Li knew what had happened. Lu Li's figure suddenly disappeared after a long sigh. When she appeared again, she was already sitting cross-legged in the center of Cloud City. She slowly closed her eyes and her body sank down little by little. She slowly and thoroughly integrated into Cloud City. Everything that should be done had been done. Next, it would depend on that guy's luck. Chapter 1290. Qin Guang didn't die. He was just completely shattered. His body and soul had completely fused with the Holy Grail. Of course, in the eyes of those who wanted him dead, he was really dead. He had turned from a complete soul into an artifact spirit. There was no difference between being alive and being dead. To the existences in the God realm who wanted him dead, the next step would be to wait for the 3,000 planes in the heavenly Holy Grail, especially the 9 great unique worlds, to evolve on their own, from nothing to something, from prosperity to decline, and finally to slowly walk towards destruction. The Protoss had a lifespan, so did the planes. However, to ordinary life forms, the lifespan of a plane was so long that it was almost eternal. But to the gods of the endless divine realm, especially the god emperors and main gods at the very top of the pyramid, even the most complete plane, as long as it wasn't the endless divine realm, the birth and destruction of these worlds were nothing more than a passing matter. Now that the heavenly grail had evolved into a complete world and left the endless divine realm, it had become a world of its own. When the world of the Holy Grail was completely destroyed, this artifact would naturally appear in the endless divine realm. When that time came, it would be found, destroyed, and refined. The artifact spirit, Qin Guang, would naturally be dead. As for how the 9 ancient wells that Qin Guang was particularly concerned about were smuggled over, and how the Master God of Chaos forcefully broke the barrier and sent one of his hands into the Heavenly Grail, the endless divine realm had to pay a huge price for these things. The God Emperors and low-tier Protoss were only projections. Moreover, the Origin Will had exploited the loophole in the Heavenly Grail to force the projection to conform to the rules and obtain the identity of a player. It was easy and didn't need to pay a huge price. However, the Master God of Chaos had come in person. Even if it was just a hand, it wasn't something that the Heavenly Grail could withstand. But if the entire plane was directly torn apart, the most likely outcome was that this extremely troublesome cup would disappear again. No one knew how many billions of years it would have to wait for it to appear again. Or perhaps, the next time it would secretly cause trouble, it would be more prepared and become more difficult to deal with. Therefore, even though the origin will of the God realm was completely emotionless, it still took a risk this time. Then he made use of the blood relationship between the Master God of Chaos and the Emperor of the Azure to trace the coordinates of the True Force realm, which was a small world, across time and space. Then he sacrificed more than 3 million genius Shenhuang projections from all levels of the endless divine realm. Finally, he managed to send a hand of the Master God of Chaos into the True Force realm without destroying the stability of the realm of the Holy Grail. In the countless years of the God realm's existence, there had never been such a thing where the 8 Master Gods and their essence wills had joined forces. Yet, they were only dealing with a weakling, and they had expended a huge amount of energy to do so. This was not difficult to understand. It was like an ordinary person who had a complicated glass piggy bank in front of them. They wanted to take out all the coins in it, but they were unwilling to destroy the piggy bank. So, the energy they had to expend would be countless times more than if they just smashed the piggy bank. It was normal for them to be sweating profusely from exhaustion. This was just a simplified explanation. In reality, the origin will and the 8 Master Gods had paid a huge price for this. After the Master God of Chaos had crushed Qin Guang with one palm, the origin will and the 8 Master Gods had taken the initiative to enter a deep sleep. They were only waiting for the Heavenly Grail's internal world to be destroyed and then reappear to find the cup. When that time came, it would not be easy to completely eliminate this tumor of the endless divine realm. Taking the initiative to enter a deep sleep to recover their strength was understandable. The origin will and the Master Gods were not worried that something out of their control would happen during this period of time. Of course, they did not have such things as emotions in the first place. In their minds, it was natural for them to decide on a matter and then complete it. The laws of the endless divine realm were formed by themselves, and the rules were set by themselves. Therefore, there was no possibility of failure. They only needed to wait for the matter to be completed naturally. It was like a person standing on a tall building and throwing an iron ball to the ground. Then the iron ball would definitely fall to the ground sooner or later. Although the current Heavenly Grail was an anomaly in the endless divine realm and brought about some uncertainty, it would return to the divine realm sooner or later. When that time came, everything would naturally go back to square one. There would not be any anomaly in the endless divine realm in the future. Everything could continue to evolve step by step. Of course, the lifespan of the Master Gods was indescribably long. The origin will of the divine realm had existed since ancient times. It was just a nap. When it woke up, everything would be fine. Time flew like an arrow, but it was also as slow as a snail. But no one could stop time from moving forward little by little. Even the Master God of Space and Time, who controlled the laws of space and time, could only achieve eternal stillness in his own domain. But the price to pay was huge. As for the entire endless divine realm, and then specifically to the Heavenly Grail, and even more specifically to the true martial realm in the Heavenly Grail and the real world after the fusion, to achieve complete stillness was beyond the ability of the Master God of Space and Time. If it was possible, the Master God of Space and Time would even want to personally speed up the flow of time in the Heavenly Grail. After all, the sooner the Heavenly Grail appeared, the sooner this matter would be resolved. In the campus of Wujing University, the sun shone brightly on the vast Yuanming Lake. A gentle breeze blew, and the clear and crystalline waves twinkled like stars. Specks of light were reflected on the glass walls of the library, adding some beauty to the library in the afternoon. The green willow tree swayed slowly with the gentle breeze, looking sleepy. A few summer cicadas were lying on the branches of the willow tree, chirping more cheerfully than anyone else, contrasting with the dispirited and listless students on the long bridge over Yuanming Lake. However, not everyone on the bridge was in a bad state of mind. There were still some people who were chatting happily and were in high spirits. The fourth-year undergraduate students were finally about to graduate. They had already taken their graduation photos in the student robes. As for the students who were about to graduate, they formed teams to go to the school building to get their own graduation certificate, degree certificate, or completion certificate. Right, I heard that Qingguang is coming too. Do you think it's necessary for him to do this? A graduation certificate is important to us, but it doesn't mean much to a rich man like him, right? Otherwise, even if he sends someone else to collect it on his behalf, the school won't say anything, right? That's not necessarily true. The richer and more powerful a person is, the more they care about their reputation. Qingguang might be rich now, but that doesn't mean that he's flawless. Right now, everyone's staring at the stains on his private life, and if he wants to wash his name clean, then he can't be criticized elsewhere. Obtaining his graduation certificate is a small matter, but if it falls into the eyes of someone with ulterior motives and posted it on the internet, then it will become a loophole for others to attack. That's true. Maybe some people have already thought of the headlines. Billionaire graduate? The dignity of a prestigious school only exists in name. Who is to blame? It's all his own fault. Where did he get the guts to do this? What era is this? He still wants to learn from the ancient times and have multiple wives and concubines? It's not just multiple wives and concubines. He's blatantly having 1, 2, 3, 17, 8, and 9 concubines. Not that many, but who asked him to have such a big heart? Who asked him to have 2 national goddesses that everyone is jealous of? That's right. I really don't know what's wrong with people nowadays. They have no sense of shame at all. Shoo, keep your voice down. If someone else hears you, they'll definitely take revenge and make things difficult for you. In fact, there's nothing strange about these rich people's affairs. It's just that Qingguang is too young and the women are too conspicuous. These things seem difficult for people to accept. That's right. Take the He family in Macau for example. Don't other people get along well with several wives? They laughed dryly and stopped discussing Qingguang's private life. The reason was very simple. On the other side of the long bridge, Qingguang was talking and laughing with his classmates all the way to this side. It was okay to gossip behind someone's back, but to discuss someone's private life in front of them was to offend them. Moreover, it was not a secret that Qingguang had good ears. It was said that there was once a person who spoke ill of the little girl beside him, Sun Xiaoxuan, across a large square. He immediately chased after the person and slapped his face a couple of times. Even then he couldn't say anything to vent his anger. The reason was very simple. Qingguang was the first to stand on the side of reason, and others couldn't afford to offend him. In the past few months, many things had happened on the campus of Wuxia University, in the vast Wuxia, and even in the world. Qingguang seemed to have suddenly changed. He was no longer wandering outside for more than half of the year like he did last semester. He had been staying in school since the beginning of the semester. He also didn't cause trouble at school. Instead, he went to and left school like an ordinary student. Of course, it was impossible for him to be completely like an ordinary person. From time to time, people from outside the school would drive into the school to look for him. For example, several executives of the Qingguang group would come to visit him. He didn't have any scruples. His office was where he was, and others could often see a strange scene in the school. A group of people in suits and leather shoes would either sit on chairs by Yuanming Lake, stand in a corner of the square, or sit in a bar in the school's commercial street. They were talking about the Qingguang group's assets, which were worth hundreds of millions, or even tens of billions. Until now, many of the IPs that Qingguang had laid out for a long time had been incubated. The global box office of Women had returned, World School of Performing Arts had been a global hit, and the variety show Hi God had been a hit since the 4th episode, sweeping the ratings and exporting it overseas. After the transformation of Tongshan Industrial Plant, Qingguang Environmental Protection had almost swept the national environmental protection industry with its disruptive heavy equipment. It had also reached agreements with many top laboratories around the world. Qingguang Environmental Protection provided technical support, and a number of scientific research institutions provided personnel, equipment, and other aspects of support. Several large photocatalyst research institutes were established, among which Qingguang Environmental Protection was in a leading position. In less than half a year, Qingguang Group and Qingguang Environmental Protection had transformed from 2 small, unknown groups into behemoths with a valuation of more than $10 billion. They could even leverage the global market of $100 billion. For the past 6 months, however, the true master of this colossus had been like any other student. He'd stayed on campus, not going anywhere. There had been rumors that a boss like him didn't need to do everything himself. There would naturally be professionals to take care of the business for him. He just needed to make more money. He didn't have such lofty ideals in life like other rich people. He seemed to enjoy the treatment of a boss who didn't have to do anything himself. Of course, it seemed that there was really no need for him to struggle. With the growing influence of the new photo catalyst around the world, many people originally thought that Chengguang Group was his foundation. However, in just a few months, Chengguang Environmental Protection, which had derived all kinds of added value around the new photo catalyst, suddenly emerged. The world suddenly realized that even if this guy didn't do anything from now on with the patents in his hands, he could at least monopolize the market of $100 billion in the next 20 years. Not to mention the inevitable competition in the high-tech industry, this didn't exist at all because he had a complete technological monopoly. No one could crack it. Men were so young and rich. It was inevitable that there would be some scandals. Chen Guang's reputation in this area had never been good. He had never been a model of cleanliness. However, no one could stand the big thing he did last month. It wasn't that he had brazenly brought them to the front of the stage, but for some reason 2 months ago, a large group of girls with different temperaments, but all of them were beautiful enough to captivate even the birds and beasts, suddenly appeared on campus at the same time. Although Chen Guang used to meet different girls on campus from time to time, it had never happened before that all of them appeared at the same time. At that time, many people in the school saw the scene in the campus square. They thought it was a man's purgatory, the most terrible charaba in the legends. However, none of these women made a fuss. Instead, they chatted happily. Chen Guang himself seemed very calm. No matter how fierce the storm was, he would not move. At that time, among these women there were Jiang Yage and Jin Shirue, the two national goddesses who were popular all over the country, Sun Xiaoxuan, the campus belle, Wu Tong, who was dressed in a police uniform, and Tang Ying, who had an elite temperament. Zhuo Jingxi, the helmsman of Chengguang Environmental Protection, was also young and beautiful. It was rumored that she used to be Chen Guang's counselor. Many people in the school knew her. Although Lu Fei, the proud daughter of the Dechuan Lu group, was not famous in the eyes of ordinary people, there were still a few people in the large Gokyo University who knew her. No one expected her to be involved with Chen Guang. However, the ones who attracted the most attention were the other three. One of them was the famous campus belle, Miss Wenwen, and the other two Lolitas, Xen Qin and Wu Miaoan, who rarely appeared in public. These women appeared in the school at the same time. Coupled with the fact that they had appeared on the internet many times before, and Chen Guang had never denied the rumors, people could not help but wonder how big this guy's heart was. How shameless was he to be able to face the charaba in broad daylight without batting an eyelid? In this world there were many people who were richer than him. There were also many people who had more women than him. However, there was no one who was as rich as him, had such high standards of women around him, and could risk the world's condemnation to get together in broad daylight. Even though the crowd did not gather for more than half an hour, and everyone quickly went their separate ways after that, the impact of the incident remained. Even today, 2 months later, it had not subsided. However, no matter what, after today, Chen Guang would officially graduate and leave Gokyo University. In the future, even if the students in the school wanted to mock him in secret or gossip about him, they would have to forcibly add the identity of an alumnus in their hearts. No one knew what Chen Guang's intention was at that time. Was he going to announce it to the world? However, there was no need for him to do so. After the incident, many people even indirectly asked around and found out that among the women who appeared at that time, not all of them had a substantial relationship with him. In fact, even Chen Guang himself did not know why this happened. Among the crowd, especially Jin Shirue, Jiang Yage, Wu Tong, and Lu Fei, who had to face great pressure when they went home, they did not know why this happened either. Everything seemed very strange, very twisted, and very strange. At this moment, Chen Guang himself was still in the heavenly Holy Grail, unaware of the passage of time. The body he left in the outside world did not have a messy private life like others thought. Instead, it was as pure as a saint, and it had been a long time since he ate meat. Some people vaguely felt that the world was starting to become a little incomprehensible. The people they were familiar with seemed a little strange, but they could not find any loopholes. Chapter 1291. The whole world had come to a standstill. Some astute people would sigh like this in their hearts from time to time, but when these people turned their heads to look around them, the roads were still busy, and all kinds of gossip on the internet were still going on. The English Premier League was about to come to an end, and the NBA Finals were won by the Warriors. This year's college graduates still received their respective graduation certificates one after another. Some people chose to apply for a bachelor's degree and devote themselves to society. Many people even signed contracts of intent with foreign companies in the first semester of their senior year, and only waited for graduation to go there. For example, the horny students in the Department of Finance of Gokyo University majored in international trade. This matter was also a good talk in the school. Many majors that scored higher than finance and international trade in the college entrance examination were not so popular. Many people regretted and were jealous. If they knew that the top 5 finance majors were so greedy, they would not have applied for environmental science. Of course, many people chose to take the postgraduate entrance examination. Among them, the environmental science was the representative. There were more than 30 people in Qin Guang's class, and more than 5 were confirmed to be postgraduate students. More than half of the students were ready to go all out for the postgraduate entrance examination. Based on everyone's usual grades, the probability of being admitted was not low. In Qin Guang's dormitory, unexpectedly, 2 of the 4 brothers were preparing to take the postgraduate entrance examination. One was Bai Nyangzi by Fan. Although this guy had been messing around during his 4 years in college and wrote some terrible online novels from time to time, this guy's grades had always been quite good. Before, he had said that he wanted Qin Guang to protect him, but that was just a casual remark and he did not take it seriously. The only online novel he wrote was the unlucky and deceptive female novel that was accidentally bought by Lu Xiaoliang. Later, Qin Guang did not advertise for him, and each novel was a failure. Now Bai Nyangzi had completely given up on this idea. The other was Xiong'er. Although Xiong'er looked big and stupid, how many of the people who were admitted to the top 5 were really stupid? His grades in the class were above average, and if he worked hard for a while, he still had hope of taking the postgraduate entrance examination. As for Lin Jingwei, he even directly guaranteed the graduate students at Peking University. Although Lin Jingwei did not stand out in class, his grades were always the best, and he could be regarded as a straight A student in his class. This meant that he would have to return to Yanjing after graduation, and he had an appointment with Gaoya. Gaoya wasn't guaranteed a postgraduate degree, but she seemed to be planning to take it herself. In fact, with Lin Jingwei's family background, Gaoya could directly get into the Yen Capital University. However, she was proud and didn't want Lin Jingwei's family to stand up for her. She was confident that she could get into the university on her own. These 2 people of different backgrounds might really continue to walk together in the future. Sun Xiaoxuan's choice was very strange. She could have been guaranteed a postgraduate position at the Chinese Academy of Sciences, but she gave up at the last moment and gave her spot to another girl in her class whose grades were almost the same as hers. As for herself, she didn't say that she wanted to go abroad, nor did she say that she wanted to stay in school to take the postgraduate entrance examination. However, she wasn't in a hurry to find a job, and when others asked her, she didn't say that she wanted to go back to her hometown to work. Gradually, everyone stopped asking about it. She was planning to stay in the 5 capitals, or wherever Qin Guang wanted to go, she would follow along. There wasn't much gossip in the class, but they felt that it wasn't worth it for her to do so. Not to mention the fact that Qin Guang was surrounded by beautiful girls. Everyone in the class knew that although they had feelings for each other, there was nothing between them after 4 years in university. Qin Guang had vaguely given her a status, but he had never taken the most important step in their relationship. Gaoya's best friend couldn't figure it out and even gave her ideas from time to time. Since she had already made up her mind and didn't care about anything else, why did she have to be so reserved? She could find a chance to drug this guy or get him drunk. She could even force herself on him. However, Sun Xiaoxuan always smiled foolishly and refused. She looked as if she, the emperor, wasn't in a hurry, so why should she, the eunuch, be in a hurry? Gaoya didn't know what to do, but she didn't insist. In short, no matter what thoughts they had, they couldn't beat the passing of time. After they got their diplomas, the only group activity left for the environmental engineering class was the last meal. From then on, everyone would go their separate ways, walk their own lives, and experience what they had to go through. Maybe one day in the future, everyone would want to have a reunion. They wouldn't all come, but they would at least get together in 2s and 3s to reminisce about their university years. At the corner of the Golden Campus Square, the owner of a barbecue shop was sitting quietly at his stall. His hands were moving up and down, and more than 100 skewers of barbecued meat were floating over the flame of the oven under the control of his dexterous and strong fingers. As they floated over, the fragrant and delicious grease was grilled out of the skewers and fell into the bonfire, igniting a bunch of flames and making a sizzling sound. The owner raised his head from time to time to look at the students who were sitting together, talking and laughing, hugging each other and crying or gulping down wine. He felt quite melancholy. Although it didn't matter who he was doing business with, these students were his old customers. Even if they left, new students would become his old customers next semester. After all, everyone was familiar with each other, so the owner was still a little reluctant to let them go. However, he soon shook his head. Why was he lamenting here? It was because Qin Guang was one of the students in this class, and he had a deep impression of him. Actually, there weren't many students who knew his surname. Gaoya opened her mouth and tore off a crisp bone from a bamboo skewer. She chewed on it and said in a muffled voice, "Xiaoxuan, I don't know what's going on, but I feel weird." Sun Xiaoxuan took a sip of juice and looked back at Gaoya. He then stole a glance at Qin Guang, who was drinking with Lin Jingwei and the others. He said, "Actually, I think so too." Gaoya stomped her feet impatiently. "What's going on? Everything is fine, but I feel like something is missing. I really don't understand." "Maybe you'll get it after a while." Sun Xiaoxuan's gaze landed on Qin Guang. Like the other girls around Qin Guang, Sun Xiaoxuan also felt that everyone was a little different since a few months ago. However, this feeling was very faint and mysterious. There was no evidence at all, and there was no scientific reason for it. It was fine if the others changed. After all, they were all ordinary people. Their minds weren't very firm and mature. Maybe it had something to do with a nightmare. Wait, maybe it wasn't a nightmare? Speaking of which, I don't even know if my identity as a player is real or fake. I remember all those things, but it's only been a few months and my brain can barely remember them. My memory wasn't so bad before. Also, it's been a few months and there are no new missions. Why is that? Gaoya began to mutter in a voice that only the two of them could hear. Sun Xiaoxuan didn't say anything. She just stared blankly at Qin Guang. Her eyes flashed, but in her mind she was thinking that everyone was like this. They were all players. Compared to ordinary people, Qin Guang was the one who was most likely to know the most secrets. However, when she asked him, he was also confused and had a headache. Sometimes it would even make him go crazy. After a long time, everyone avoided these topics in front of him. He was supposed to be a player, but he chose to forget about it. No one mentioned it to him. Regardless of whether it was Sun Xiaoxuan, Zhuo Jingxi, Lin Jingwei, or the executives in his company who were also players, or even his old subordinates in the summer of Wuxia, they had no choice but to come to a tacit agreement when faced with someone like him, who was undoubtedly the strongest player in the world. They couldn't bring themselves to say anything. The only S-rank player in the human world had probably gone berserk. No one was allowed to talk about player matters with him, much less the mission space. Otherwise he would go crazy and suffer from seizures. But they couldn't go on like this, could they? Sun Xiaoxuan shook her head helplessly. But what else could they do? Yes, there was nothing they could do. For players like Sun Xiaoxuan, the strongest was only a C level. Other than waiting for Qin Guang to recover, there was nothing they could do. After all, even Wenwen, who stood at the peak of A level and might have reached S level, couldn't do anything. It was said that she tried to use the dual cultivation technique to forcibly awaken Qin Guang's memory, but she failed. This guy rejected her. That's right, he rejected her very firmly. When Wenwen showed the slightest sign of it, he turned around and ran. Even Wenwen, who had done it with him more than once in the past, had been sternly rejected by him. Needless to say, Sun Xiaoxuan, Tang Ying, Jin Shiyue, and Wu Tong who were close to him but had never done it with him. Speaking of which, he didn't know how Tang Ying's research was going. Many people didn't know that in addition to Morning Light environmental protection, Qin Guang had actually invested in another laboratory, which was the bioengineering laboratory led by Tang Ying. After becoming a player, Tang Ying, who was originally only a second-tier scholar in the world, suddenly had an epiphany, and the results came like a whirlwind. According to her, her IQ had also increased. In the past, she was about 167. Although she could ride on the heads of ordinary people and beat them up, there was still a gap between her and many legendary geniuses in human history such as Planck, Tesla, Einstein, and Zhu Chongji. But after awakening as a player, she claimed that her IQ was as high as 245. As for why it wasn't 250, she told people not to ask her why. In short, she lived frugally and guarded the samples she had taken from Qin Guang. The progress of her genetic analysis was improving almost every day. At first, in order to prevent the leak of Qin Guang's important resources, Tang Ying chose to work alone. But since Qin Guang began to act strangely, everyone became anxious, and Tang Ying's genetic analysis became a life-saving straw. After some discussion, They agreed that Tang Ying would distribute the samples to the top laboratories around the world through the method of gene cultivation and proliferation. Of course, she still had a trick up her sleeve. She only gave each laboratory a fragment. This precise gene fragment cutting method was something she had come up with herself in the past few months. According to her, she could probably win a Nobel Prize in biology in a few years. In the end, Tang Ying's task changed from a single person's hard work to a compilation of all the research results. This was extremely difficult for a researcher, but Tang Ying, who claimed to have an IQ of 245, was able to turn misfortunes into blessings. Of course, the help of other laboratories wasn't free, but the companies under Qin Guang were super rich. In addition, the Ministry of Heaven also allocated funds regardless of cost. Jiang Yage and Jin Shirue also contributed financially to the country. Although Qin Guang didn't want to be involved, everyone had their eyes on him, the only S-rank player at the moment. Even if the strength of many players had increased naturally and inexplicably over the past few months, the only thing that was undoubtedly the strongest S-class was still very important. Come to think of it, it was strange. The game space didn't descend again and no one did anything, but why did the players' levels increase inexplicably? No one would ever think that even though Qin Guang was already dead, he was still alive in a certain sense. Perhaps he was in between the living and the dead. In the past, every time he entered the world in the cup, it was only for a very short period of time in the real world and no one else knew about it. But it was different this time. If converted to the outside time, it had been from the beginning of the second semester of the 4th year until he received his graduation certificate and degree certificate. What he entered into the world in the cup was almost all of his soul. What was left outside in scientific terms was only equivalent to the little bit of intuition in his spine, which could generally control blood flow, knee-jerk reflex and so on. But it took too long this time. If he really died completely, then the Qin Guang in the outside world would probably be completely replaced by a soul fabricated by the heavenly Holy Grail. Perhaps this soul could inherit all of his memories, all of his personality, and help him complete the rest of his life. But a fabricated soul would always be a fabricated soul and not the real him. But the current situation was that although he was dead, he had completely merged with the heavenly Holy Grail, and this real world was a part of the heavenly Holy Grail. The current Qin Guang existed in the cloud city of the heavenly Holy Grail, in the realm of true force and also in the real universe. He had completely divided into countless particles, and was everywhere in all the worlds of the heavenly Holy Grail. Even in the real universe he was on Earth, and in distant galaxies such as Andromeda and Orion he was also present. He had turned into particles so small that it was negligible, even smaller than the so-called quark particles, but he really existed everywhere. In the real universe the world was still operating, although the direction of the operation was a little strange. So he who stayed outside had to live like a normal person. His soul, which had originally sunk into the heavenly Holy Grail, was slowly crossing the barrier of time and space, and returning to his body in the real world. As for the realm of true force, 1 billion years had passed. Just as Qin Guang was worried, the millions of human players in the 9th Holy City, including Chu Zijin, Zhuo Jingxi and Lu Fei, were still unaware. Qin Guang had disappeared for 1 billion years, but everyone seemed to be in no hurry. It was as if he had just found a deserted place to slack off and take a nap. Chapter 1292. In the past billion years, everyone had found a position for themselves in the true martial domain, and then unswervingly walked towards this position. If Qin Guang were to sum up the current human players, they might be considered as humans, but in a sense they were not humans. The whole world was like a machine that would never wear out, and everyone in this world, a flower, a grass, a tree and an insect, were all parts of this world. The natives in the true martial domain were generally the kind of parts that could be worn out, but could self-restore. As for the outsiders, the immortal belonged to the real high-level parts that would never be damaged or aged. Moreover, because of Qin Guang's disappearance, no one stood up to tell them that the situation was not right. Perhaps even if Qin Guang spoke to someone else, the other party might be able to understand his words, but they wouldn't be bothered by it in their minds. It was not only the immortal who had become slow, even the natives in the heavenly Holy Grail, and even Master Xan Qing and Wu Qingming, who were constantly dying and being reborn, did not feel anything wrong. But in fact, if a normal person could still remember time, they would be scared to the point of wetting their pants when they thought that someone had not aged for 1 billion years. Among these countless parts, there was one that was slightly different. It was not that she had realized something, but she had been doing the same boring thing over and over again in the past billion years just like everyone else. This was Tang Ying. As early as after Qin Guang left, Tang Ying spent about 10 years to finally complete the first analysis of Qin Guang's genes in this world. The Lord Holy Emperor had disappeared, and they couldn't get a new sample. However, Tang Ying in the true martial world had also patted his forehead, and had a sudden inspiration. He had thought of a way to combine martial arts with science. Coincidentally, a female captain of the Holy City's Godi I-13 practiced a martial technique that was compatible with longevity, and was best at stimulating biological activity. When Qin Guang had created this martial technique, he had borrowed the idea of Emperor Qing's lost technique from a novel he had read in the past. It was called In Search of Supernatural Records. Although it wasn't as marvelous as the Xuanhuan novel in the true martial world, its destructive power wasn't bad. Qin Guang first passed it to a younger brother, and it was passed down from generation to generation. When Tang Ying came up with this idea, a woman happened to inherit it. With the cooperation of the two, the sample was successfully multiplied, and the research continued. After a few decades, Tang Ying finally finished decoding Qin Guang's genes for the first time. In fact, it shouldn't have taken so long. However, although the overall technological level of the Zhen Wujie and the real world was almost the same, the production of high-precision instruments was still slower. In the past 50 years, Tang Ying had been waiting for at least 30 years for the equipment to hatch. When Qin Guang left, the frame she built was barely usable, but it was not precise enough. Logically speaking, after completing the first complete deciphering, Tang Ying should have nothing to do. However, she did not feel that anything was wrong and started to decipher from the beginning again. Then, she compared the results of the two times, and it took her another 20 years to find something different. It was reasonable to say that DNA represented the most stable structure in human genetics. If there was a genetic mutation, it was either cancer or deformity. Then she used the same person's sample for both times. Even if it was multiplied and cultivated, it should be exactly the same. In addition, she used the same person's sample for both times. Even if it was multiplied and cultivated, it should be exactly the same. Then why were the results of the two attempts different? Tang Ying was puzzled, so she didn't think too much about it. Then she started the third time and it took her another 20 years. Then she combined the results of the 3 times and compared them together. This time it took her 30 years, but she found something different. A billion years passed in the blink of an eye. Tang Ying couldn't remember how many millions of times she had repeated the same thing. What made her feel desperate was that even though she had repeated it so many times, she still faced the same situation a billion years ago. The results were not exactly the same. Thanks to the further improvement of the semiconductor industry, the true martial realm had a vast territory. Although there hadn't been any revolutionary scientific and technological progress, the computing power of the supercomputing system in the true martial realm had already surpassed the Earth by many times. Who told the world to be so big, to be able to stack materials regardless of the cost? So, in the later stages, Tang Ying, who had the ability to use the supercomputer at any time, no longer needed to compare the gene sequences. She only needed to input the data into the supercomputer center and then wait for the results. It was much faster than doing it herself. Of course, it also took a long time. A single gene sequence was a huge amount of data, not to mention that Tang Ying had slowly accumulated to tens of millions of times. Tang Ying, who was wearing a white coat, was sitting on an ergonomic chair. She looked at the progress bar in front of her, which had reached 98%. In fact, she had been waiting here for more than 10 days. Although there was only 0.2% left, she was afraid that it would take at least half a day to finish. Ring ring ring. Tang Ying's phone beside her rang with a text message. She stretched and picked up the phone. The text message was, "Notice, all directors of the Martyr's Palace, please head to the mysterious Heaven Palace to attend the regular board meeting within an hour." Tang Ying shrugged and looked at the progress bar unhappily. It was still at 98%. "Forget it, I don't think it will be finished in a short time. It will be the same if I come back after the meeting. I really don't want to be a director anymore, sigh." Unlike the others who were immersed in their different identities, Tang Ying had only been guarding her research center for the past few years. For example, Wu Tong had given herself the title of Zhen Wujie's Public Security Department. Now her authority was no longer limited to the 9th floor. She was in charge of the public security departments of the entire Zhen Wujie. The others were more or less the same. Jin Shuiwei and Jiang Yage had held concerts in the 9 holy cities and other 2nd and 3rd tier cities. The reason why Tang Ying was still a director was because she needed unlimited authority to use the supercomputer center, as well as to allocate resources to operate and develop her own biological research center. The power structure of the Martyr's Palace had evolved over the years. It had changed a lot since Qin left. Currently Wu Tong, Tang Ying, Sun Xiaoxuan, Zhuo Jingxi and Lin Jingwei who were closest to Qin were all directors. In addition there were the inheritors of the 3 emperors in the 9th Holy City, as well as 2 or 3 new top martial emperors who had risen in recent years. Abbess Xan Yuan and Wu Qingming, the 2 masters, were not there. Although they had already recognized their disciples, the 2 of them had already assimilated with this world. They didn't have the physique of immortality. They died 1,000,000 years after Qin left. But after a few years, the 2 of them cultivated martial arts again and returned to the 9th Holy City. The 2 of them were somewhat different from the real natives of the true martial domain. Ever since their memories were awakened by Qin, they wouldn't lose their memories even if they were reborn. The Martyr's Palace's directors' meeting was held once every 10 years. But this time the 2 masters were not there. They had been reborn 2 years ago. Only God knew which corner they were cultivating martial arts again. There wasn't anything extraordinary in the regular meeting. They talked about the recent major events that had taken place in the true martial world. They talked about whether there was anything worth paying attention to. They also talked about where Qin might have gone and so on. In fact, he had been missing for 1,000,000,000 years. But at the meeting, these people talked as if they had just seen him half an hour ago. This so-called meeting was nothing more than a concrete embodiment of the power structure of the true martial domain. To put it bluntly, it was just a gathering of people from time to time. But Tang Ying was quite absent-minded from beginning to end. She had a strong desire to go back and see the results of the calculation. Why are you in a daze? Let's go out later? Wu Tong, who was sitting next to Tang Ying, elbowed her waist. Tang Ying shook her head. No, I'm busy. Wu Tong covered her mouth and laughed. Why are you always guarding that broken place of yours? You're going to get old if you keep staying at home. Tang Ying rolled her eyes. I can't be bothered to joke with you. I reckon we'll see the results this time. Wu Tong continued to tease her. Come on, I don't know how many times I've heard you say that. How many times? Wu Tong seemed to have a momentary doubt as she spoke. She seemed to be asking Tang Ying but also seemed to be asking herself. In fact, the 2 of them didn't know that they had already had a similar conversation more than 1,000,000 times. Not only did they say the same words, but even their tone and expressions were completely the same. But this time the conversation between the 2 was a little different. Wu Tong asked a question at the end. Tang Ying frowned slightly. She wasn't angry at Wu Tong. Instead, the restless feeling in her heart was getting stronger and stronger. She couldn't care less about Bai Hua, who was excitedly introducing the new discovery of the energy company. She got up and walked out. Hey Lady Ying, where are you going? Wu Tong asked as she got up. Tang Ying walked quickly. I won't be coming to dinner tonight. I'm going back to the lab to take a look. After saying that, she jogged all the way. Her steps were swift. Wu Tong thought for a moment and followed her. Before she left, she turned around and said to everyone, Nothing big has happened in the police department recently. I'm going to take a look at the situation. After saying that, Wu Tong also ran away. Although the others were a little surprised, they didn't care too much. In the real world, although everyone was familiar with Qin, they didn't meet each other often. They had been in the Zhen Wujie for 1,000,000,000 years, but there was no substantial progress in their friendship. Basically, everyone was still minding their own business. Wu Tong followed Tang Ying's pace and rushed back to the lab. When she pushed the door open, she saw Tang Ying staring at the monitor in a daze. Wu Tong approached her and asked, What the hell is going on? Tang Ying didn't answer for a long time. After a long time, she muttered to herself with a blank face, How could this be? It's impossible. What the hell is going on? Seeing her blank eyes, Wu Tong panicked. Tang Ying slammed the table and said, I get it. This guy's genes are different from ordinary people. Even the dimensions are different. Wu Tong didn't understand what she was saying at all. She simply grabbed Tang Ying's shoulder and shook it. Are you stupid because of your research? Tang Ying broke away from Wu Tong's hands and threw herself in front of the monitor again. Her eyes widened as she looked at the new DNA combination diagram that was moving like the Milky Way. There were countless small dots constantly moving on it, and each dot represented the most basic DNA unit. The DNA structure of ordinary people was, of course, stable, but the three-dimensional diagram in front of Tang Ying never stabilized for a second. In fact, she didn't know how the supercomputer center did the calculations. All the previous results could be shown in a flat way, but this time, after the comparison, a picture like this appeared. After a long time, Tang Ying finally calmed down and said with a strange look on her face, I knew it. This guy is different from us. What do you mean? Wu Tong felt that Tang Ying was becoming more and more paranoid. She wondered if she should find a master who practiced spiritual-type skills to help her. You've heard the story of the worm, right? Tang Ying turned around and asked. Wu Tong? ? If you put a piece of paper in front of you, the surface area of this paper is infinite, and then put a worm on it, no matter how the worm crawls, even if it crawls for a lifetime, its trajectory will be limited to this piece of paper. But humans can directly grab it and throw it into the air. Wu Tong understood a little. Aren't you talking about the difference between two-dimensional life and three-dimensional life? Tang Ying nodded. Yes, in our understanding we live in a three-dimensional world and human beings are also three-dimensional life forms. To be more specific, each of our genes are basically determined from birth. Even changes in individual cells can't affect our overall state. Our height, appearance, and body shape are generally limited to a certain range after birth. What about Qin Guang? You've been doing analysis for so many years. What have you found? Tang Ying sighed. His DNA is different from ours. This guy's genes are changing. Furthermore, it is eternally changing with time. Wu Tong asked, so what does this mean? Tang Ying looked back at the monitor in front of her. This means that I'll never be able to get the real answer. Even though it seemed that I had completed it tens of millions of times and finally created such a three-dimensional image, I felt that I could continue to repeat it tens of millions of times on the basis of this image. At that time, I would probably be able to create a second three-dimensional image, but the two three-dimensional images would still be able to be combined together. Perhaps, even if I make tens of millions of such three-dimensional pictures and continue to combine them, I still won't get anything. This guy's genetic sequence is simply tens of millions to the infinite power. Wu Tong was a little confused, but that didn't stop her from feeling Tang Ying's despair. While the two were talking, the nebula picture on the monitor began to change, becoming smaller and smaller. Huh! Tang Ying exclaimed in surprise. She saw the nebula picture that originally covered the entire monitor shrink to the size of a pixel. Then, it floated out of the monitor and flew into the air. Wu Tong muttered to herself, "What's going on?" Tang Ying was also stunned. "You're asking me, but who am I supposed to ask?" The two inside didn't know that time had once again stopped in the real world outside. In the Biology Research Institute of the Five Capital, Tang Ying was jumping in the air in ecstasy. Her hair was fluttering, her legs were bent, and her whole body was half a meter above the ground. On the monitor in front of her was a three-dimensional picture that was exactly the same as what Tang Ying had seen in the true martial domain. One had used 1 billion years and repeated it tens of millions of times, while the other had only used half a year, but the final result was the same. Of course, this three-dimensional picture was also shrinking, leaving the monitor and floating into the air. In the deepest part of the heavenly Holy Grail, in a certain spatial gap in the infinite darkness and far away, two particles the size of pixels floated over from the void. They slowly stuck to each other, and then completely fused into an extremely tiny bright spot. Then this bright spot began to move, turning into a line. This line spread out, then kept changing direction, hovering, and finally became a human shape. Qin Guang suddenly opened his eyes. "I'm back again?" Chapter 1293. He tried to raise his hand and touch his face, but he failed. He couldn't find his hand at all. No, he didn't have a hand. He didn't have any other limbs, waist, abdomen, chest, buttocks, or even a head or a neck. Right now, he had a humanoid shape, but in essence, it was still the trajectory drawn in the void by the fusion of the two pixels. It was similar to the principle of the electron cloud. Of course, the electron cloud didn't really exist. It was just an electron moving at a high speed within a certain range. Then, it was constantly captured by the microscope, and the trajectories were gathered on a picture. What was presented was the electron cloud. At this time, Qin Guang was more advanced than the electron cloud. At least, it was a trajectory drawn by a whole line of continuous motion. Of course, maybe it was because the speed of the previous dot was too fast, or maybe it was because the speed of light dissipating in this special space was too slow. So, it looked like a whole body at this time, but in fact, it was just pure energy. Qin Guang didn't have anything to be angry about. At least, he now had consciousness again and could think in his mind. This was much better than being in a daze before. As for the previous period of time, Qin Guang still had some vague memories. It was difficult for him to describe that feeling. After thinking about it, he could only say that it was like a person who couldn't drink well suddenly drinking half a caddy of erguoto. How long have I been in a coma? Since he couldn't move, Qin Guang simply let his mind wander. Now he felt very strange again. It seemed that he had been in a coma for half a year, but it also seemed like it was only for a moment. Suddenly, there was a vast and distant feeling in his heart. He felt as if hundreds of millions of years had passed, enough for the life on Earth to evolve from a single cell to a human. This strong feeling of dislocation didn't make Qin Guang feel uncomfortable. He was very indifferent now, as if nothing mattered. Outside, since he woke up, the time in the real world and the true martial domain had been completely frozen, even if the flow of time in the true martial domain had been accelerated by billions of times. Qin Guang did not know what he was waiting for, nor did he know why he was in this state in the void. He also did not know what was waiting for him next. When a person completely lost the concept of time, no matter how boring the wait was, it would not shake his state of mind. Nicole, you have two choices now. First, reject my request, then watch as Qin Guang and I meet our end. If you're lucky, you'll be able to escape when the Holy Grail is destroyed. At that time, you'll become a member of the God realm and obtain a seemingly eternal life. Second, voluntarily offer your mechanical heart, accept the fate of death, and pray for our success. At that time, even if you die, he will have the ability to create nothingness with a single thought after transcending the myriad worlds. Even if you're really dead, he can resurrect you and give you a true life. On the other side of the void, there was a small round ball floating, and a faint silhouette of a person appeared in the small ball. This small ball was the photocatalyst research world that Qin Guang had accidentally created. Of course, after a long period of investment and faith, this small laboratory in the cup had already expanded far beyond the scope of a laboratory, becoming a large-scale research center. Nicole's scope of research had also long since broken away from the limits of photocatalysis, and expanded infinitely according to her own interests. As a science geek with a clear brain, Nicole mainly researched machinery and electronics in the real world. She was also proficient in various basic subjects such as physics, chemistry, mathematics, and so on. She also had incredible talent, and even though she was working alone, she was still able to research an unimaginable epic-making thing like the electromagnetic cannon. Although it wasn't stable and even blew herself up, if it wasn't for that accident back then, Nicosia would have spent a few more years perfecting it. Perhaps she would have been able to create a true finished product of this revolutionary weapon of mass destruction. Although she was dead now, she had entered this cup in the cup, and obtained an almost eternal life. Now that several months had passed in the real world, and a billion years had passed in the realm of true force, the small world that Nicole stayed in had simply advanced by 10 billion years, which was even longer than the lifespan of Earth. With such a long time and tireless, even an ordinary person should have become a super genius, not to mention a natural genius like Nicole. She would never be unable to find a direction of research. Not to mention Earth's technology, just the picture of God that suddenly unfolded in front of her after her soul was sucked into the heavenly Holy Grail was enough to exhaust her eternal wisdom, but she still could only see the tip of the iceberg. Of course, even the tip of the iceberg was enough for Nicole's understanding of the rules of the God realm to reach the level of a God Emperor. If she could have the opportunity to leave the heavenly Holy Grail and descend into the God realm, with her current understanding of the rules, she could become a new God Emperor in a very short time. But now, Azure had presented her with two choices. Did you know that I would definitely agree? Sitting in the laboratory, Nicole raised her head and looked at the shadow in front of her. She did not have any excessive reaction and asked very calmly. Azure's voice came from the shadow, "Yes, the more you understand God, the more you will understand what we want." Nicole was silent. She still remembered the excitement and curiosity when she first came into contact with God after she was killed in the explosion. Now she did not know how many years had passed, but she had slowly changed from the initial curiosity to the current understanding. When the veil of God was lifted layer by layer, Nicole's reverence towards God gradually dissipated. It turned out that the so-called God was nothing more than this. They had a longer lifespan, greater strength, and some supernatural special abilities. These abilities were strange, strong, and weak, but they all came from the God race's understanding of the so-called rules. After Nicole spent 10 billion years peeling off the silk cocoons and penetrating the seemingly mysterious rules of the God realm bit by bit, her perception of the so-called God stopped at nothing more than another relatively high-level life in another dimension. The essence of the God realm's rules was no different from the two iron balls on Earth falling at the same time. What was it that he really wanted? What was the true life that this God Emperor named Luli was talking about? But I really want to know what a God Emperor with mechanical power would be like. Although I can roughly imagine it in my mind, I haven't seen it with my own eyes. Nicole said with slight unwillingness. The shadow said disdainfully, "What's there to see? It's nothing more than some summoned creatures, or else it's a mechanical body. This emperor has seen a movie on Earth called Transformers. You can probably think of yourself as the original core of Cybertron. Is that so? A god emperor with mechanical life appeared in the god realm before? No, but I've heard that God Emperor Shinji is obsessed with the love puppet technique. A plane he created once gave birth to a mechanical life with strength close to that of a god emperor. As for you, you're probably just a little higher level. But how do I know that you won't lie to me? What if you fail? Or even if you succeed, you can't return the mechanical heart and I won't be able to resurrect. Nicole was already wavering. Azure did not mind. If you think that this emperor and Qinguang will lie to you and go back on their word, you can refuse. Ever since we started on this path, every step we took was extremely dangerous and we could fail at every step. If you can't sincerely take the initiative to strip the mechanical heart, even if there is only a trace of doubt, we will definitely fail. After we die, this holy grail will naturally perish. At that time you can just go and be a god emperor. If your luck is good enough and your life is tough enough, you might even be able to become a main god. Nicole waved her hand in pain. But that's meaningless. No matter how long my life is, I will eventually be assimilated by the entire god realm. That is equivalent to a complete death. She remembered that she had once been promised eternal life, but now she had long since given up on the idea of eternal life. No matter how long she lived in the endless god realm, in the end she could only end up with her consciousness and divine sense completely disappearing and dying. Only the countless rules and origin energy that she cultivated during her long life would be turned into stars and absorbed by the entire god realm. Such eternal life was even worse than death. As if she had already sensed Nicole's thoughts, Azure said, "Your guess is right. This is also what this emperor thinks. We are probably just pieces of bricks. The meaning of our birth and growth is ultimately to add bricks and tiles to the endless god realm. Although we don't know who is controlling everything from the outside, nor do we know why the other party would spend such a huge amount of energy and time to construct the endless god realm, this is still very unfair to us, right?" When she spoke of this, Lioli felt very lonely in her heart. Just like the gods who played around with the planes in the god realm, who knew how many lower planes there were within the jurisdiction of the endless god realm. The countless lives in the countless planes had experienced an endless amount of time, but in the end they were just adding rules to the endless god realm bit by bit. Perhaps, at the moment when the god realm was finally completed, the gods would finally perish and everything would turn into nothingness. When they looked up again, they would just be a plaything for a child from the outside world. However, this child who thought that he was a sovereign was also rising layer after layer, as if there was no end to it, and there was no hope in sight. So far, everything seemed to be going smoothly for her and Qinguang's desperate struggle, but it was still unknown whether they would be able to achieve their goal in the end. On the other side, Nicole finally nodded. "All right, I agree." On the other side of the void, Qinguang's body trembled slightly. Just now, he seemed to feel a slight vibration in his body. Originally, his body did not have a physical body. Since it could vibrate, it meant that there was a change. After a long time, Qinguang could clearly feel that his body was finally starting to slowly become physical again. However, he still could not move and the changes outside were still continuing. Chapter 1294. On the completely still earth, there were 10 corners that were undergoing strange changes. These corners were scattered all over the world. There were 4 in Wuxia, and the other 6 were either in the depths of the Amazon forest at the edge of Greenland, or on a small island in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, or in a hollow in a valley under the Alps. These corners had a lot in common. There were statues that had been erected not long ago, and below the statues sat, knelt, or stood. There were as many as 10,000, and as few as 1,000 people. The statues that they made were the 10 statues that Qinguang had painstakingly collected in Cloud City. In the real world outside, these man-made statues were almost exactly the same as the statues that Qinguang had obtained. It was strange that no one had ever seen the 7 statues that Qinguang had left behind. However, the architects and craftsmen who were responsible for designing and making these statues were able to think of the shapes that they had in their minds from the very beginning. When they had really finished making them, they felt that some of the statues were not very elegant, and even made people feel that they were very strange. For example, an abstract work like half an alto car, ordinary people really couldn't understand it. However, once the shape was decided, no one asked for it to be changed. Of course, it was fortunate that the legendary pile driver idol didn't materialize into a sect and was left in the sea of time. Otherwise, no matter how thick-skinned a person was, they wouldn't be able to accept their idol's appearance. Since it was called a religion, of course, only those who had faith in pursuits would join. They attributed the inspiration of these strange statues to the guidance of God. It was precisely the God that they believed in that was secretly guiding them. That was why they burst forth with this kind of inspiration that ordinary people couldn't understand. However, it was precisely because of this that the incomprehensible statues felt especially unique in their hearts. When they stood under the statues to pray or make a wish, they could feel a stronger power of wish, as if the distance between them and God was invisibly pulled closer. Although the people under the statues were in different postures, these people all had similar expressions on their faces. Slightly squinting their eyes, a tranquil smile on their face, and their lips slightly curled up, they looked so comfortable and carefree, as if they had forgotten all their troubles. Thick, thin, pure white or light green threads extended from the heads of these believers, and connected to the statues in front of them. There were still many people around the world who recognized or joined the statue sect who had yet to appear in front of the statue, but this did not stop them from contributing their faith. The same threads of faith spread from all over the world, connecting to the statue from afar. For example, the link between Lu Fei and the half-alto statue was a dark green thread as thick as a thumb. Although she had long since stopped racing cars, this did not prevent her from continuing her hobby. She could always compare other people's achievements with Chen Guang's. However, the more she compared, the more she realized how unsurpassable Chen Guang was. When the power of faith was condensed to the extreme, the 10 statues began to emit a hazy shimmer, and this brilliance became brighter and brighter as time passed. When the brightness exceeded the limit, the statues, which were either made of marble, plated with bronze, or simply made of reinforced concrete, emitted thick smoke at the same time. Thick smoke rose, but the statues disappeared at an extremely fast speed from top to bottom. After the statues disappeared, the threads of faith above everyone's heads disappeared as well, taking away everyone's faith in God. In the void, Qin Guang trembled slightly after obtaining the mechanized and condensed skeleton. He could clearly feel that his body was gradually becoming more substantial. The pixels formed by the fusion of genetic sequences outlined his silhouette, and the mechanical heart that Nicosia gave him formed his skeleton. Now, these beliefs collected from Earth began to supplement his flesh and blood on the foundation of the skeleton. When the 10 statues on Earth completely disappeared, although he still couldn't move, he knew that something had been added to his body. Probably a Tetris? Other than lampooning inwardly, Lord Guang could do nothing else. He didn't know that the outside world had been frozen, nor did he know that his 10 statue sect members had built statues for him, and now the statues had flown away. Following that, the faith formed by the 10 statues seemed to have opened up a mysterious passage. After they passed through, the passage didn't disappear. Soon the people on Earth changed again. The bald president of the Anti-Light Alliance was sitting on a rattan chair in an outdoor tea house with his legs crossed. The cigarette between his fingers was still curling up, and the cigarette rose from his hand and floated in the air. At a glance, it was in the shape of a dragon. At this moment, he was leaning against the back of the rattan chair with his head raised. His eyes were slightly glazed over, and he seemed to be at a loss. Just a moment ago he was bragging to his friends about his past glory, about how I was like when I was the president of the Anti-Light Alliance, about how Qin Guang trembled when he saw me, and about how the girls in the Anti-Light Alliance idolized me, blah 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 blah. Of course, everyone knew that he was basically bragging. Everyone knew that he, the president of the Anti-Light Alliance, was the only person who hated Qin Guang. The others were all die-hard fans. Also, there wasn't a single female member in the Anti-Light Alliance. Even if there was, it could only be because he had disguised himself as a woman. His friends didn't laugh at him. Everyone knew that he had been living a bleak life for the past few months. Qin Guang didn't keep a high profile anymore. Instead, he focused on staying in school and being a good student. This caused the Anti-Light Alliance to be at a loss and have nothing to do. That was why the bald president could sit here and chat with his friends. If it was in the past, he would have led his people to chase after Qin Guang and cause trouble wherever he went. At this moment, a white mist was coming out of the bald president's head. This white mist was the strong obsession he had with Qin Guang. The middle-aged men beside him also had smoke coming out of their heads, but it wasn't as thick as the president's. Although these people weren't interested in Qin Guang, they had been indoctrinated by their friends like this every day, so they had no choice but to know about it. At the same time, other than the members of the 10 divine statue sects and those who had previously given faith to Qin Guang, there were at least 3 billion people around the world who had smoke coming out of their heads as well. Even if they didn't have much admiration for Qin Guang, everyone had more or less heard of him, and this name was in their minds. Now that they were being taken away, it was the faith in Qin Guang in their hearts. In the distant depths of the universe, there was a planet that was 70% to 80% similar to Earth. It was about 3 times the size of Earth. On this similarly azure planet, there lived a race that was extremely similar to humans. However, they were slightly shorter and had pointy ears, resembling the elves in fantasy novels. At this moment, in the sacred land of the elves, an emerald green spaceship was slowly rising into the sky. The people on this planet also knew about Qin Guang's existence. They even planned to send a spaceship to contact Qin Guang. However, before their spaceship could take off, time froze. On this planet, there were also many people with smoke coming out of their heads. The smoke was many times fainter than that of the people on Earth, but it still existed. In the universe, there were at least hundreds of thousands of planets with life that were experiencing the same thing. Humans didn't know that in the vast universe, there were at least hundreds of thousands of cosmic races that were paying attention to everything on Earth. At this moment, all of their faith had gathered together and crossed the infinite distance to slowly fly towards the passage. Qin Guang sat up straight and looked down. There was an indescribably complicated expression on his face. After such a long sleep, he finally woke up. However, before he could carefully examine his body, he only felt an irresistible and tyrannical suction force. He heard Azure's voice that he hadn't heard for a long time. "Young man, do your best. There are still 2,813 worlds and cups waiting for you." Qin Guang was shocked. "What do you mean?" "Nothing. Either we all die or you conquer the entire world within cup." Qin Guang said, "I need to discuss this with the spirit of the Holy Grail. At least let me know what's going on." Azure only chuckled. "Why don't you think about it carefully?" Qin Guang was at a loss at first. Then he came to a sudden realization and his face turned ashen. "I've become the spirit of the Holy Grail. I have to conquer myself?" Chapter 1295. He did not have much time to dawdle. Just as he said that in his mind, he was sucked into the spacetime tunnel in the next instant. This tunnel was still the same familiar feeling that he had experienced countless times before. There was not much change. The only difference was that when Qin Guang stayed in the tunnel previously, he had no way of knowing what the next world and cup looked like. Even though he already knew the specific scope of the world within the cup, it was only a general concept. He had no way of knowing the exact shape of the world within the cup. But this time he had a very clear picture of the overall structure of the world within the cup. What awaited him now was the world of esports. In the past, Qin Guang had trained his Dota Tower technique to perfection in the cup world. However, Dota Tower was only a type of esports, and it could only be considered as one of the MOBAs. It couldn't represent all esports. Right now, Qin Guang would be facing the advanced version of esports in the 3rd stage of the Yunxiang Cup. He would have to train in all the esports realms from the day he was born, including but not limited to CS, Soccer, CF, Dota, LOL, Kings of Glory, and so on. Even PUBG, which had recently become popular, would be in the list. Qin Guang was very puzzled. If he remembered correctly, he had not pursued anything in the game for a long time. Why did the World and Cup suddenly give him a mission for no reason? However, he did not feel any pressure. It was a game after all. It was a test of the player's on-the-spot reaction, tactical thinking, and other qualities. There would be some differences between different types, but there were many similarities in essence. For example, in the recent super popular PUBG games, retired professional Dota and LOL players learned faster than ordinary players, and their relative standards were also higher. This was the reason why. Qin Guang had now reached the peak of Dota, and then went on to dabble in RTS, FPS, and sports games. His starting point was very high. Thus, this time, in the World and the Cup, he was able to learn very quickly, much faster than before. Back then he had trained hard in the small pool for several years. Now that he was in the 3rd tier of the Elephant Sky Cup, the small pool had become the esports training center. The computer equipment hadn't been upgraded much, but his sparring partners were many times better than the computer people back then. The consciousness of all the famous top players in the history of competitive gaming were perfectly copied into the game. The Human Emperor, Beast King, and Moon Devil in World of Warcraft, the Hierarch and Flash in StarCraft. In short, anything you wanted was there. No one had ever been able to enjoy such comprehensive training as Qin Guang. Even if it was just an ordinary person with such an opportunity, they would at least be able to train to the semi-professional level. Moreover, Qin Guang's talent was far beyond that of an ordinary person. He played all kinds of games at an extremely fast speed, averaging one game every 2 weeks. He absolutely crushed everything. During the whole process of the challenge, Qin Guang had a feeling in his heart. Even though he was fighting with the advanced artificial intelligence created by the world in the cup, he felt like he was fighting with his left and right hands. This was probably why Azure said he had become the spirit of the Holy Grail. At this time, the electronic notification sound was gone. There was no need for it. He knew how far things had gone. Throwing the keyboard in his hand, Qin Guang got up and stretched. Then, in the process of stretching, his body was sucked into the space-time tunnel. He didn't need any reminder at all. He knew in his heart whether he was done or not. This time he didn't even have time to rest. After finishing one, he went straight to the next. The Cloud Sky Cup's world in the cup far surpassed One Line Sky in terms of area and quality of the world structure. Of course, the ability that Qin Guang needed to train was also far beyond One Line Sky and One Line Sky. After becoming the strongest esports player in human history, he didn't even get to be proud for a few minutes before he was suppressed by the new world in the cup. Even though the old man had boasted that he was a top student, it didn't mean that he really wanted to be a top student. I'm about to become a god. I'm about to defy the heavens. I'm about to conquer the divine realm. I'm clearly a city boy turned into a fantasy male pig. What's the use of learning this? Now you're telling me that I want to learn mathematics? That's right, the world in front of him was the world of mathematics. Qin Guang was very hurt. He wasn't afraid of hardship, tiredness, or difficulties. As long as he could become stronger, anything was fine. Whether it was the innate talent ability of the past or the new version of innate strength, it didn't lose to the so-called mathematics in terms of profoundness. In terms of cultivation, every time he wanted to take a step forward, he had to thoroughly understand the entire set of cultivation techniques. Now that the rules were involved, he had to go through all of them in his mind and understand them one by one. In the past, when he practiced martial arts in the realm of true force, the various ancient books he faced were all unpredictable and difficult to understand. There were often situations where he could understand every single word but couldn't understand a whole sentence. Just reading the ancient books was difficult enough, let alone learning them. This was countless times more difficult than simply reading and learning. Every step required an extremely strong talent and a crazy brain burn. Even so, he still learned it all. But now, he was asked to learn mathematics from beginning to end like a student. He felt that it was meaningless and wanted to protest. I know that mathematics is known as the foundation of science. All theoretical research can be attributed to mathematics. There are even theoretical masters who can use mathematics to explain the evolution of the universe, species evolution, or space-time wormholes. Otherwise, they can directly calculate the density of the illusory antimatter. But theory is theory after all. No matter how profound it is, it can only stay on paper. Unless all aspects of science and technology keep up, even if someone jumps out and brings humanity's mathematics level forward by 300 years, it's basically useless. 1 step ahead is a genius, 10 steps ahead is a lunatic, 300 years ahead is basically a hole to bury. No matter what you say, others can't understand it at all. What's the use? I protest. Can I not learn? My protest was unsurprisingly ineffective. About 300 years later, Qin Guang became the most comprehensive mathematician in human history after Archimedes, Newton, Gauss, Euler, and Riemann. Perhaps his mathematical talent was completely inferior to those who were known as the king of mathematics, the prince of mathematics, or the god of mathematics, but he could use a full 300 years to learn. The first 200 years were all kinds of force-feeding, the last 100 years were summarized, and then he became a master. Don't ask me what 1 plus 1 is. Such a profound question. I can only tell you clearly that it is equal to 2. Don't you admire me? The legendary gold box conjecture that has baffled mankind for many years was solved by me. What? You want me to prove it? I can prove it, but you can't understand it. You won't understand it anyway, so you just need to know the result. Don't look at me with that kind of admiration. I just have a small achievement. In short, after spending hundreds of years, Qin Guang did indeed reach unprecedented heights in the subject of mathematics. Even the 3 major conjectures that had troubled mankind for hundreds of years had no difficulty in front of him. Unfortunately, at this time, he could only be in a rather depressed state. If he could go out and return to the real world, he would have 10,000 ways to show off in his mind. But right now, he could not go out, and he had to continue to strive for the next world within a cup. Defeating oneself was not the most difficult thing, but after defeating oneself, one could not tell others how bad *SS1 was. Forget it, I'll just leave it at that. What I'm doing now is called practicing internal energy. After I succeed, I'll go out and show off. Anyway, I know more and more, I will be able to use it sooner or later. Imagine standing on the street by yourself. First, you kill all the cunning people in the park who set up chess stalls to cheat money. Then, you go back and shock the math Olympiad students who meet in the park. When the others still haven't recovered from their shock, you can pat the shoulder of the financial gold collar who is walking next to you in a suit and tell him which stocks are going to crash and which stocks are going to hit the upper limit today. Then he would turn around and take out his phone. He would then write a program on his phone and solve the uncanny valley phenomenon that had troubled programmers and filmmakers for many years. He would make the 3D idols on the computer go from data to reality. After that, he would go find Jiang Yage and Jean Shirihua to sing a song together. Cough cough. The third realm he faced in the Cloud Elephant Heavenly Cup was the realm of singing. After being tortured by his own wailing and howling, Qin Guang, who was tone-deaf and had negative talent, finally embarked on the path of a real singer, no, a singing machine. In the blink of an eye, many years had passed. He had gone through a total of 243 Cloud Elephant Cups. From challenging the rules of the Holy Grail to challenging himself, Qin Guang's biggest discovery was that he no longer had the possibility of dying from failure. In the past, he would have died 7 or 8 times in the first world within the Heavenly Spirit Cup, let alone the third world within the Cloud Elephant Cup. At most, he would have died dozens of times. But now, he had gone through 243 Cloud Elephant Cups in one go without dying even once. Even if there was a temporary failure, such as when he opened his mouth in the realm of singing, a rain of knives rained down from the sky. His body should have been riddled with holes, but not only did the rain of knives fail to stab him to death, they even fell directly into his body. That's right, after they fell on his head, shoulders, or hands, they were forcefully absorbed by his body, like a sponge absorbing water. At first, he was worried that he would die after having so many iron elements forcefully shoved into his body. It was only when he felt bloated that a metal spear popped out from his but after he farted that he felt at ease. At that time, he thought that he was having diarrhea and had an accident. In the end, before he could come to his senses, he propped himself up from the ground. This was a terrible feeling. The knives rained down from the sky, and there was still a continuous stream of knives entering his body. The metal spear under his butt became thicker and thicker, pushing him higher and higher. It was only when he was dozens of meters above the ground that the rain of knives finally stopped. Only then did Qin Guang break free from the metal spear and slide down this flagpole back to the ground. Similar situations occurred in the other Cloud Elephant Cups as well. There were all sorts of strange situations, but the results were the same. Although the process was extremely tortuous, he did not die even once. The settings in the cup realm that were specially designed to punish him and take his life were completely ineffective against him. After completing the Cloud Elephant Cup, Qin Guang thought that what awaited him next would be the fourth Clear Sky Cup realm. However, after he jumped out of the space-time tunnel, what appeared in front of him was a super simplified version of the Sword Spirit Sky. Qin Guang immediately understood that after completing the current realm, he was here to clear his debts. What awaited him were 2093 middle realms of the Heavenly Spirit Seeing Cup. There was a saying that out of the 365 professions, there would be a master in every profession. The world was so big now, and there were definitely more than 365 professions in every profession. Even 3,650 professions would not be enough. The Heavenly Holy Grail focused on training all kinds of abilities that could be put into practical use. Although Qin Guang already knew a lot of them and even felt that most of them were useless, he did not have the right to refuse. The toughest pen calligraphy, brush calligraphy, the best ping pong, the best glass marble, the best trash collection, the best professional sewer dredging, the best fruit platter. In short, in the 2093 Clear Sky Cups realm, Qin Guang's worldview was greatly impacted. If he had not experienced it himself, he would probably never have imagined that there were so many unorthodox methods in this world. He also remembered that Colored had once said that when the Heavenly Holy Grail created missions, it would often use the ideas in its mind as a basis. Now that he had to face more than 2,000 Clear Sky Cups in one go, he had almost squeezed out all the experience he had in the real world, which was not very long. The Heavenly Holy Grail had racked his brains just to gather enough numbers. He really regretted knowing so much. Why didn't he avoid the small advertisements on the street when he saw them? Instead, he stared at them carefully a few times. The best treatment for condyloma acuminatum, infertility, sigh. I'm really actually quite broken down. Chapter 1296. In any case, regardless of whether these skills and abilities were meaningful or not, It took Qin Guang a long time to complete the 2093 middle realm of the Heavenly Spirit Cup. Thankfully, the strongest ability that he feared the most didn't appear. Otherwise, he would have died from anal prolapse. After that, he didn't have any time to rest. What awaited him were the 727 middle realms of the Heavenly Spirit Cup. Compared to the first level, the second level of the world in the cup covered a larger area, and the training ability was also more concise. For example, the previously separate hard brush calligraphy and brush calligraphy were directly summarized into one word in the one-line sky, calligraphy. Under the conditions of the one-line skies cup, Qin Guang, who had already mastered it, didn't need to stick to hard brush or soft brush, or even if he didn't have a brush at all. As long as he wanted to leave traces of calligraphy on a surface, whatever he took out would be very artistic and powerful. The strongest table tennis was also upgraded to the strongest small ball game. Not only did it include table tennis, badminton, tennis, dodgeball, as long as it was a small ball he could play it. He had mastered the piano in the past, and in the one-line sky cup, the heavenly holy grail simply made his skills more comprehensive. After some hard training, he became proficient in all musical instruments. Not only did he have the piano, but he also had the electronic organ, the zither, the moon zither, the violin, the cello, the harmonica, and even the horsehead zither, as well as the big harp that the mermaid hugged in her arms. This heavenly holy grail was also very practical. As long as there was the word musical in its name, it would be accepted in the one-line sky cup. In fact, the order was already reversed. In the previous Cloud Elephant Heavenly Cup, he had already learned all kinds of musical instruments, including but not limited to wind instruments, plucked instruments, percussion instruments, string instruments, and so on. Although there were musical instruments, there were also mouth-blowing instruments, and there were even unorthodox instruments like the accordion. However, Qin Guang had been exposed to all kinds of musical instruments before, and he had even obtained the strongest certification that surpassed ISO 9001 in the cup realm. Now that he had changed the classification of the second stage of one-line sky, it was not completely meaningless. Instead, he realized that after the certification of Cloud Elephant Sky, he actually had 2 more certifications of one-line sky, further strengthening his training to the extreme. In the past, no matter what skills he learned, most of them relied on the force-feeding method of teaching to hammer the skill to the extreme. However, after training in Spirit Sky, One-Line Sky, and Cloud Elephant Sky, any skill that had overlapping training brought him an indescribable strengthening effect. If the results of the first level of training in the Sky of Seeing Spirit could be said to be close to the Tao, then the training in the Sky of Frontiers would become the natural Tao, and the training in the Sky of Clouds would become the Tao that could connect with the gods. Layer after layer of training allowed his achievements in a certain matter to be continuously stacked, and in the end, it formed a magnified effect. In the past, when he played the piano, he could use the tempestuous rhythm to make people worship him, unable to look directly at him. But now, after a long period of study, his talent in music, which was originally equivalent to the standard of an ordinary person, or even worse, had been unleashed to the extreme. He had reached another realm. As the saying goes, the stupid bird flies first. Even the stupidest bird would be able to fly to a place where others would be left in the dust. In the past, Qin Guang had boasted that his talent in music was 0, so he had never called himself a master pianist. He had always thought of himself as a craftsman, because he could only play existing songs and not compose them. But now he was different. After going through the repeated special training in the first 3 stages of the Holy Grail, his talent in music had been infinitely magnified. The current him had long since mastered the skills of composing music, and could even raise his hand to play super music that no one had ever done before on the piano. Whether it was impassioned, slow and melodious, or passionate or cold and strange music styles, he could easily play them all. These songs were guaranteed to be unique in human history, and any one of them was enough to drive pianists all over the world crazy. They would have to spend at least 10 years or at most several decades to study and analyze them, and then they would discover to their shock that this was actually the next stage of art. However, musical skills were only one of the more than 200 major skills that he had mastered. Under the more than 200 major skills, he still had more than 700 minor skills, and more than 2,100 minor skills. In human history there had been many fields of learning such as literature and art, painting and art, architecture, military affairs, philosophy, governance, engineering, science, and so on. In modern times, various subjects had been further expanded, and any comprehensive university would have dozens of majors. For example, the Gokyo University that Qin Guang studied in was a representative example. Further down, literature and art could also be divided into poems, songs, novels, plays, operas, and so on. These kinds of classifications would also diverge according to region and era. For example, Shakespeare's plays and the operas of the Yuan dynasty were two completely different things. Further back, Homer's epics and Chu Yuan's songs of the South were two completely different things. As for scientific knowledge, it was even more complicated. In universities, there were all kinds of basic subjects such as materials science, chemistry, mechanics, computer science, physics, chemistry, and so on, or environmental science, which was a very comprehensive but very specific branch subject. Each of these subjects was enough for a person to exhaust their entire life to learn, and yet still not see the end. Through the previous 3 stages of the world within Cup, Qin Guang had grasped all sorts of knowledge in his mind. At this moment, he was standing at the pinnacle of human history in every field. It could even be said that he had completely surpassed this era by 1,000 years. Even if the current human beings exhausted the power of the entire earth, exhausted the current 7 billion people, in the future they might reach the wisdom of 10 or even 20 billion people, it would still take a whole 1,000 years to catch up to his current knowledge. Fortunately, he could not find anyone to compare himself to. Otherwise, just the pretentiousness that emanated from his entire body would be enough to make others explode on the spot. Qin Guang felt that there was something wrong with his brain. Of course, he had always been abnormal. Otherwise, how could his brain contain so many memories, so much knowledge and knowledge? Even if it was forced in through force feeding, there was still a limit to the capacity of a person's brain. No matter how complex and unimaginable the structure of the brain was, connecting one hard drive after another with brackets and building a data center the size of a football field would still exceed the limits of the human brain structure, and it would not be able to contain so much knowledge. But now, after the frenzied training of the first 3 worlds of the Heavenly Holy Grail, Qin Guang realized that there was no limit to his brain, and he even had a very strong sense of hunger. He wanted more. Even though his brain already contained almost all the knowledge since the birth of human civilization, he was still not satisfied. When the 4th world of the Heavenly Holy Grail, which was also the true world within the Heavenly Holy Grail, appeared in front of him, he suddenly came to a realization. It was no wonder that when he wanted to practice martial arts, the Heavenly Holy Grail would give him the power realm of the Heavenly Holy Grail and the worldview framework of the 8th heaven, which was also the realm of true force. It turned out that the first 3 worlds of the Heavenly Holy Grail were simply to build a foundation for himself. Only after reaching the 4th world, the Heavenly Holy Grail, would he truly be able to break away from humanity and evolve in a supernatural direction. Strictly speaking, inner strength martial arts were already a supernatural power, but there were also great limitations in the past. There were very few people who could master it, and the degree of mastery was not deep either. In the real world, reaching the master realm like one was already the limit. It was only when Qin Guang himself appeared that this limit was broken. The 4th world, the Heavenly Holy Grail, had truly opened up a completely different picture of him from the past. At the same time, Qin Guang's horizons were instantly raised to another level. Sitting cross-legged in the space-time tunnel, the various events of the past flashed across the depths of his mind. He could not help but sigh to himself. Although he had been at the lowest end of the first 3 heavens for a very long period of time, he had made his way through the many worlds within the cups, especially the last few times he came into contact with the Protoss, and the incomparably long period of time after he was smacked to death by the Master God of Chaos. All of these stacked together to build such a solid foundation for him today. No wonder the Protoss could project themselves. That laughable principal will of the Heavenly Holy Grail actually thought that he had schemed against me? Little did you know it was the Heavenly Holy Grail that let you in. You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Adventures YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.